Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Okay, great. We've got people entering the room on the virtual webinar. I'm just going to be here doing a few acknowledgements to get us started off. Obviously, I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is a huge room and we had a catering limitation. So we were inevitably going to end up with an audience that looked a little undersized for the space. But the space is obviously desirable for other reasons. And, we're going to have a lot of people, I hope, on the virtual component to this. So what I want to do first is just draw your attention to the acknowledgements and the thank yous part of the agenda, which is way at the end. It's on the final page there. And just make sure that everybody knows that this is hosted by the generosity of a lot of different elements. And they include the Peabody Museum, the Cambria Hotel, Barossa Catering. These are like negotiated rates that kind of help people be able to participate. In addition to that, we have a lot of people who have been given their time and their labor to this effort. And I really, really appreciate working with the committee and the students who have been helping with that. So if you want to see the list of names, they're all at the end there. And of course, there are departments that contributed funding for this as well, and they're also listed. So now that I've had a chance for people to kind of appear in the webinar, and I can see people are kind of trickling in, I wanted to go ahead and just say that it's gratifying to see the interest we have. I don't know how many people will be here for the entire event because it's kind of lengthy, but I assume there will be people moving in and out, both of the virtual and the in-person components today. And I hope that somebody gets something out of it. We will be recording this part of it so that we'll be able to review it later. And if we want to, maybe we'll have the opportunity to do closed captions and translations in case it's useful, what comes from today. And then, of course, tomorrow's event, for those of you who can make that, is in person only. And that's where the breakout rooms are going to happen, where we'll actually discuss what we've discussed today, but we'll discuss it more. And hopefully in a kind of a solutions-oriented framework where we're looking for specific solutions to specific problems. Okay, so what I want to do now is introduce our panelists who have generously come here and given their time and their expertise to us doing this. And I am echoing on the webinar, right? I think somebody's got me logged on and needs to mute themselves. Potentially. Well, yes. Can everyone hear me now? No? Okay. I'll just use my big voice for this, because I think that'll make it easier for all of us. But I need to convey, first of all, the apologies on behalf of Dr. Laura Stout, who is unable to make it today. She had an urgent issue arise at the last minute. And, she's very disappointed to miss it. So you'll notice that the panelists that we have here are, in fact, the people who we put on the website, but we are -1. So unfortunately, that's happened. But I think we still have a great number of voices to bring to this event. And what I want to do is kind of just say, why are we doing this? First of all, we want to kind of do a couple of things, and not all of those things can be done in even a 2-day workshop. One of those things that comes to mind is how can we make fieldwork more inclusive within the communities where we actually do fieldwork? And that's something that tends to come to a lot of people's minds when they think of this issue. And it came up a lot. Should we try to tackle that here, or should we save that as its own very important and special topic for a future workshop? And we decided to go ahead and do that because we felt that dealing with that and also dealing with how can we make people have a better sense of belonging as they are on the sort of the scientific side of the fieldwork and they're trainees and they become PIs and they're leading fieldwork, that piece to it is what we're going to tackle with this workshop. And we're very much aware that those things are interrelated to each other and that they're obviously both very important. So inclusivity can mean both of those things. And we want to make sure that each of them gets kind of a fair weighting. So hopefully we'll be able to do this again at some point and, maybe in the near future, and that will be more on the community side of things. So today we're going to be dealing with this question of how can we improve access and a sense of belonging for field scientists? And that's a very broad and hopefully inclusive term also. So these are people who might be kids and they want to become scientists, and they've never even really thought about what fieldwork might mean for them. That can be a part of it. It can also mean all the way up through the pipeline to more senior people who are leading large groups, and how can they use their position and their experience to make the experience more inclusive for everybody who's with them. And then also, how can we ensure that the people who do go all the way through that pipeline are a diverse group of people themselves? So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with today. And the purpose of this particular workshop, that I think is its strength, is to bring together people across the earth, the life, and the social sciences. I know that a lot of what we've been doing, there's a lot of great efforts that you're going to hear about here. This is a big issue that's been tackled by a lot of individual people as it pertains to things that they see as problems that are right in front of them, right? And the problems that are right in front of them are also problems that are right in front of a lot of other people. And they're coming up with solutions that aren't necessarily always available or easily known where to be found for other people who might benefit. So I kind of started to get a sense as I was looking to do research for this, that there's a little bit of reinventing of the wheel that might actually be going on, and that we could benefit a lot more collectively if we brought together expertise across the disciplines where people have already been thinking about this a lot. So we know that fieldwork is something that not everybody does either. So you can't always know, oh, you're in the geosciences, you must be in the field a lot. We can't know that automatically. And I think it kind of makes it hard for us to communicate with each other, because we don't necessarily know which individual people might be coming up with which individual solutions in which individual kind of department or research center. So the purpose of today is to bring those voices together into a single space, and where we find common problems, hopefully we can also find common solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists then. You will have seen them on the website, and the full bios are there. And I know that sometimes these things can get tedious introducing long biographies, so I'm going to give the Cliff Notes version. And if you want to see the full written biography of each person, you'll be able to reference the website there. So it's actually not in any order. I'm going to scroll through my slides here, and I'm actually going to go in order. So I'm going to start on that end and come this way so that it's logical. You'll know that from looking at the website, I hope, Scott Taylor is an associate professor and director of Mountain Research Station Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And he describes in his biography that he is a naturalist by heart, and the field is where he recharges and where the questions come from, and what inspires him to be a biologist. So his efforts in the area of more inclusive fieldwork span activities at annual meetings, such as organizing the Tri-Society DEI Symposium on Field Safety and Ethics in 2022, and also newly implemented strategies at the CU Boulder Mountain Research Station focused on community building and support. I'm going to move on to Jennifer Kasbaum, who is, well, she put in her bio that she's a postdoctoral researcher here at Yale, but now she's not anymore. She's actually a research scientist at the Carnegie. And she is, well, okay, so the bio is out of date now, but will be joining the Carnegie Institution for Science as a staff scientist in the Earth and Planets Lab in April 2024. So that's already happened. She's a geochronologist, and she's interested in basically how to date everything and know how old all of the rocks on this planet are. And she's done a lot of work, especially in the development of kind of field safety protocols, and recognizing a need that in sort of making fieldwork more inclusive has to involve making people be able to feel safe. So hopefully we will hear some of what she has done. Her advocacy has led to the adoption of fieldwork codes of conduct in the Princeton Geosciences and also Yale Earth and Planetary Sciences. We go to the next person, who is Dr. Murray Burgess, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture at Mississippi State University. She grew up with an interest in the wildlife around her and followed this interest into a degree in wildlife, fisheries, and aquaculture at Mississippi State, earning the BS in 2019, and then an associate wildlife biologist certification from Wildlife Society, and then going on to grad school and very rapidly returning to Mississippi as an assistant professor. So her efforts, she uses her own experiences to inform her pursuit of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in academia and the natural sciences. And she's co-founded the Field Inclusive, which is a nonprofit dedicated to amplifying and supporting marginalized field researchers in the natural sciences. This is financial aid, trainings, and field safety resources. So you can check out those resources online after this. And one of the things hopefully we can also do here together is pool those resources into one place so that there's a place people can go to find all of these things and not necessarily have to invest in all of the hunting around to see what's going to suit them the best. We have Elena Schroeder, who is Assistant Research Professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at North Carolina State University. She's an alumna of the Chicago Public School System and a first-generation college student who first performed fieldwork in high school as part of a STEM outreach program provided by the Chicago-based nonprofit Project Exploration. So she has a BS in geophysics from the University of Chicago in 2006. She has worked there for 2 years at Project Exploration, and then delivering inclusive class and field programs in paleontology to underserved and underrepresented students. So a lot of her experience kind of speaks to the earlier part of that STEM pipeline, and in particular, the field researcher experience. So recently, she has co-authored an article with 2 women of color in paleontology that discusses their personal experiences as students, field sciences, and faculty in geosciences, and then their insights on how these academic environments can be improved to better support individuals from diverse backgrounds. We have Nala Williams, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology here at Yale. We thought it was incredibly important to include voices from people who are not necessarily in faculty jobs, and that is where we see a lot of kind of where people kind of, I suppose, that identity of being a field researcher or not being a field researcher often gets born at that point in the career. So she's a PhD candidate in anthropology and African American studies, and her research examines how Black women archaeologists negotiate their relationships to each other and the field of archaeology amidst race-based sexism and gender-based racism, as encapsulated through the intellectual and socio-political world of anthropology. So she argues that through ties to other Black women in the field and a sense of obligation to both ancestors and future Black archaeologists, they work to craft a more liberatory archaeology. And Nala has presented her work to broad audiences, including the American Anthropological Association, Society for American Archaeology, and Society for Historical Archaeology. And because Dr. Laura Heath Stout won't be here, I'll be hopefully pinging off of Nala a little bit on the anthropology side. Because I identify myself as an archaeologist / biological anthropologist who does a lot of field work. And so we have everybody here today. What we're going to do is write down your questions. You need to write down your own questions, and then afterwards save them. And if they're not answered in the course of the conversation that we undertake here, then we'll be able to pose those questions, and hopefully we keep the discussion going. So it will be a conversation, I hope, an engaging sort of conversation rather than just sort of a watching thing. So thank you again, everybody, for joining, and everybody for coming and registering and being a part of this. And let's go ahead and get started. I'll be moderating here, but let's first of all just welcome our panelists and say thanks so much for coming. So first I'm going to ask them, and this is going to take about half an hour, if they can say something about themselves, in particular, kind of what is your primary type of field experience and engagement with field work? Are you sort of more on the leader side, the trainee side? Do you have large teams, small teams? And then what kind of environment do you typically do this in? Is it more urban-based? Is it remote? Is it international? Just to kind of get a sense of the kind of backgrounds and perspectives that we have in front of us. And then we'd also be interested in knowing, what does fieldwork look like for you in your group? Are we talking about tents? Are we talking about camping? Are we talking about an established field station? And then that gives hopefully the audience a sense for what kinds of questions they might be able to ask that are a little bit more specific to that. So after we go through that, then I'll come back and hopefully the discussion will be a bit organic. But I think that if something comes up in the middle of somebody saying something, it would make sense to be able to just say, hey, can I ask a question about that, and keep it a little fluid rather than sort of formal. But we'll just go ahead and do it in the same order that we started. So we'll start with Scott that side, and we kind of work our way down. Yeah, I'd say go for it. So yeah, what does fieldwork look like from where you stand or sit?
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. So as I was introduced, I'm the director of a field station at the University of Colorado. So my perspectives more recently come from having multiple researchers from multiple groups, as well as field courses all running at the same time at a station, and we can have between 30 and 100 people at the station at any one time. So that's my current perspective. But I started doing field work in South America as a graduate student, and as a gay person, my safety was always something I wondered about in the field, and so that's what I've brought to being the director of this field station. I don't know what else I'm supposed to say other than, like, the context of creating an inclusive field station is an interesting thing to think about, because field stations for a long time have kind of been these bastions of white, mostly heterosexual privilege. And we all hear about field stations and we usually hear the negative stories first, right? Like, watch out for that one person or whatever, even though why hasn't that one person been fired? Which is, how it goes, I suppose, but hopefully that's changing. So thinking about how to, like, create an inclusive community where you have a combination of researchers, students at various stages has been something I've been really interested in. And then I think one thing that I've really been thinking about recently and would be great to chat about as we go through this is the inherently ableist nature of field stations, particularly like our field station, which is at 9,500 feet. And to get to the most heavily researched part of it requires hiking up another 2,000 feet, at 10,000 feet of elevation already. So there's thinking about that and what that has done in terms of who's been able to participate in research at our field station over the last 105 years that it's existed, is something I think about a lot, but would be happy to chat more about.
Awesome. So I'm a geologist primarily. And so for me, geologic field work takes the range from a class geology field trip, which is maybe, let's say, 6 to 30 students with a professor and maybe some grad student TAs going off somewhere in the world, domestically or abroad, to look at rocks and really like learn for a class. And really, as I think we can all agree, the field is one of the best places to solidify concepts you might read about in a textbook. So those are my first field experience was, going on a class trip to Sicily for 2 weeks. It really made me think, you know what, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to be a geologist. So it was immensely important for my educational journey to do field work. And then as I progressed and moved on through my classes and knew I wanted to do a PhD, I then became an undergraduate field assistant for a graduate student's PhD research. So what that looked like was, rather than a big group of friends going out and maybe like staying in some like Airbnb kind of style lodging, was instead we went to Namibia for 3 weeks of camping, a mix of like camping in the bush and staying in like they called it their woolshed, the landowners. And so we had access to a shower and a bed, but we also did some camping. Crucially, that was actually my first camping experience. I'd never gone camping before college. I'll also say that this was 13 years ago, and before we were having these conversations about inclusivity in the field. And I actually didn't feel comfortable sharing with my advisor that, this is my first time camping, LOL. And fortunately, it was a very supportive and safe experience. I felt like, I never at that point felt like I didn't belong. I was like, I did it. Learned how to pitch my tent, had a great day looking at rocks all day in the field. And again, really felt like this is my identity. This is what I want to be doing going forward. So then as I entered my own PhD and became the person in charge of planning and leading fieldwork, taking an undergrad of my own with me, usually for graduate student fieldwork in the geosciences, your advisor will come for like a week or two and then leave you, alone or, with your undergrad assistants for several weeks. And I've worked in both places, kind of, I've worked in the Northwestern US, which looked like car camping in campsites and collecting samples from mostly road cuts, which are in the public domain. So not too much interaction with landowners. But also I did one of my big PhD projects in Northwestern Australia, literally the middle of nowhere, with no access to facilities, well, only every couple of weeks when we went to town to get groceries. And then just really being out in the middle of nowhere with like a classmate and an undergrad. And unfortunately, it was during grad school where I felt for the first time from some of the people I was working with and out in the field with, I had the first feelings of like wow, you're really making me feel like I don't belong here. Wow, I really can't believe you said that. Wow, I really can't believe like, you laid your hands on me in this physical manner that like I did not welcome. So those experiences that actually were like really critical in making me question whether I belonged both in the field and in science generally. So I think it was, here I am, still going. Fieldwork is still an incredibly important part of my work and part of my identity as a geoscientist. And I'm thrilled to be here today to be talking about the policy changes we can make and the community of inclusivity that we can support to help future students continue to see fieldwork as part of their identity.
Hi, everyone. So my primary experience with fieldwork, the bulk of it actually happened when I was late undergrad and going into grad school. So as an undergraduate, I was always, volunteering for projects or just having all these class trips, even a study abroad trip to Belize. And so my first experiences were part of this group. I'm friends with pretty much everybody in the group. And so it was pretty relaxed and it was like everything was going well. And then I moved into grad school and my first field season was 2020. And so I was not allowed to have any assistance or help because of COVID protocols. And so my field site was in this very rural area. I was going out there sometimes at night because I study light pollution and birds. And so it's just me in this driving down a rural road with Confederate flags and all the Trump signs. And it's just like, this feels so unsafe. And that's when it really hit me too, as well as like, I'm not the only person who has these experiences. And so this is an issue. And this is something that I created Feel Inclusive to address and be able to start to like address some of these things. Was like, we talk a whole lot about physical safety and looking out for like dangerous animals, poisonous plants, but nobody yet has really talked about personal social safety. In addition, now I have transitioned again to back working with groups, but now I'm the PI of the group. And so how do I make sure that the experiences that I have had don't happen to some of my students? And that I'm like a heavy planner. So that looks like I will go to like a field site that I plan to take them ahead of time. And the one example that I wanted to bring up was that we were planning to have a lab at a refuge. But at that refuge, I was just like walking around, checking out our route. And I wanted to look at one of the signs there. It was talking about the native wildflowers. And as I went up to read about the wildflowers, there was a racial slur just etched in the glass of the sign. And so that looks like me completely changing my plans because one, I'm not taking students there just to have to like see that type of thing. It also took like, over a week to fix. And so just thinking of stuff like that, just making sure that people feel safe when they're doing this work, whether they're in a group or not in a group, and making that more accessible to people. I think that's all I can say.
Hello, I'm Elena. For my own personal fieldwork experience, I've had a lot of diverse experience. Like I have done paleontology excavation work in the American West, in like South Dakota and Wyoming, both with groups where I was a high school student and groups where I led high school students. In graduate school, I also did a lot of field work in Weirdly, New Jersey, which is where the first scientifically recognized dinosaurs were discovered, in mud pits and taking classes of undergraduates there for day trips. I've also done work in the very southern tip of Argentina, out where you can see kind of the glaciers from standing outside. And I've done that in kind of a remote way with just a couple of people back where you have to drive 2 hours to get to your field site. So I kind of got a lot of diverse experience of the style of field work. But I'm especially really interested to talk to you guys today about the groups of high school students from the Chicago public school system that I both was in when I was a student and went out to places like South Dakota, and then also led those expeditions as a person on the other end of the program, developing the program and taking it out. And a particular thing that I just want you guys to think about today is if you are out there and you are a person that you want to take like a diverse group of students to a place like South Dakota or Wyoming or very remote, and you're like, why aren't there more diverse students in this class? have you thought to yourself what you will do if someone like calls your student the N-word at a diner? Have you had that conversation with yourself? Because it's happened to me more than once when I have a dozen African-American students with me in Wyoming. And part of this, like part of doing diverse field work is thinking about those things in advance, because it shouldn't be on the student to confront that alone, because you're the mama or papa bear in that situation. So how do we make ourselves people that are champions for the people we'll be taking to the field? Because, and this is something I think we'll get more into about, especially when you're like me, a first generation college student, you kind of go through a system in which the message that you get is you're on your own, nobody cares about you. And if you can't hack it, someone else is there to take your place. So how do we make ourselves available to students that feel like this is their problem and let them know that it's not their problem? We're their champions. How are we going to protect them in these spaces? Oh, yeah, there's another mic. I didn't.
Is this one on? Okay. So in contrast with some of the other panelists, my dissertation fieldwork is about Black women archaeologists who do fieldwork. I also do fieldwork as a cultural anthropologist, but it's more just like me, just talking to other Black women, which is a delight. And I think for the most of my participants, the majority of Black women who do archaeology in the US, they all typically do historical archaeology, which is on like plantation context sites in the US. There are a handful of people who do work in Europe and some who do work in Africa, but I would say like 95% of them do work in the US. So it's like urban areas. A lot of people do work in the South. That's like kind of like the majority is like in the southern United States. And thinking about the experiences of the people that I've researched, I think that because my dissertation's about it, anti-Black racism has a huge component, like while people are in college and when people do field work and shaping their experience and shaping if they even continue to do research. I think a theme that popped out in my research is like people have such sort of like overall negative experiences that they decide to leave the field for a variety of reasons. But kind of just like echoing these sentiments about like fieldwork being safe. I also had an interlocutor who had a similar experience of being like in like a rural area, doing cultural resource management alone, where like they interacted with someone who was like the head of the Ku Klux Klan in their area, who was like told them like, we know that you're a queer woman and like you're not safe here. And so like having to communicate to the people like the CRM firm, like, hey, I actually can't do research here anymore because I'm not safe for all these reasons, and trying to like explain that to people that might not have the same context. And although I focus on them being Black women, there's obviously various other identity factors like people's access to like how expensive field schools are. Dr. Heath Stout, who's not here, has an article about fieldwork accessibility and how much field schools cost as being a barrier to entry for a lot of students in archaeology. And also just like thinking about like, yeah, is this fieldwork space, is this program going to be a place where like, I guess for my particular research, where like Black women and like Black students are going to be safe and affirmed and have research that isn't offensive to their entire sense of self.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I can say a couple of things too. I'm sitting to the side just because I want to not take over the panel, but I lead field projects in Central Africa, and I've taken students and trainees at a number of different levels, undergraduates and graduate students, master's degree students, and PhD students. And then, of course, there's a lot of international logistical things and international law and cultural attitudes that you kind of have to navigate and try to explain and inform the people who are coming with you in advance of what they might encounter without necessarily making them feel unwelcome about what they might encounter. Because, you know, you're going to be going into another place, it's another country, it's got its own laws, it's got its own cultural attitudes, it's got its own history, and you can't really impose your own perspective on that. But at the same time, you want to make sure that people on your team feel that they can be safe and that they have, at least if they have the desire, that they have the ability to access those experiences as well. So that's kind of more the perspective I come from. But I'm going to pass the mic back to the panel now and just let the discussion carry on, and I can maybe pop in from time to time as a moderator more. So here it comes back. I've got a couple extra questions here. So one of the things that I thought we could talk about is if you could name like the primary obstacle that coming from your context or your experience or the people you've talked to, what do you think is the most primary obstacle to actually more inclusive field practice in your area? If you had to name like the one, or you can name two if you really want to. But of course, you'll see that next we'll talk about solutions, I hope, and that'll be the focus of the breakout rooms as well, is to brainstorm and try to see if we can emerge from this, like where are the commonalities and like what is the thing that would be the most significant barrier that you have witnessed?
So there's so many so many obstacles at so many different levels, but one of the things that I keep noticing again and again and again in paleontology is that paleontology, along with a lot of geosciences, are very undiverse for sciences, and they have not actually, the statistics show they have not increased to be more diverse in like 40 years. And one of the things that I've noticed in talking to colleagues is that they always have this notion, it's like, why aren't poor kids? Why aren't Black kids? Why aren't these kids interested in science? And it's like, it's not that they're not interested. It's that you can't survive and build a career on interest alone, right? A person cannot thrive on passion alone. You need material support. And what that's going to look like for a student that doesn't look like all the other students that have come before you is going to be different. So different students, first generation college students, students from underrepresented backgrounds, the support at each level they'll need to progress in a career is different. And just getting students interested, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, in paleontology, they keep circling around this notion that we need to build interest in dinosaurs. Like, it's not already baked into the cake. Like, everyone loves dinosaurs. We need to harness that interest and actually get it to move forward. But I think the biggest obstacle is just trying to get people to realize that the thing they've been doing for 40 years has not worked, and it is time to stop doing it and do something different.
Yeah, I will echo a lot of that as well. I think one of the huge barriers is just finance. Because in our department at Mississippi State, we constantly encourage students, like, spend your summers doing internships, get some type of field experience, hands-on experience. And it's like, yes, but one, most of those internships are unpaid. You get paid in experience. And a lot of students, they have to work actual jobs to pay for some of their student fees or tuition for the next semester. So you get this infeasible obstacle. It's like, well, if I don't get experience and I can't get a job, but if I don't do a job now, then I'm not going to finish college. And so just those kind of dichotomies of, like, how do you even get experience when there's this huge financial barrier to it? And I'll also add on that I think the second major barrier is just representation in general. My field, wildlife biology, is still predominantly white male, still a lot of older white men. And so you get students who come in who just, like, don't see themselves or their interests represented. I had a student just a couple of weeks ago say that she was planning on quitting until she saw me come in and give a lecture on a topic that she was interested in. And she was like, okay, now I'll continue because finally there's somebody like me who I see doing this thing. And so I think just that pure representation, someone who can understand the students and where they're coming from and their backgrounds, is also super important.
Yeah, just echoing what Murray said, when Jess posed the question of what's a big obstacle, I do think identity is a big part. I think in my field, in the geosciences, I mean, if you close your eyes and picture a field geologist, maybe you're thinking of a white, bearded, dirty man. And so if you do not identify as white, or you can't grow a beard, or you're not a man, or you even don't like being dirty, you might not visualize yourself as being a field geologist. And we chuckled at the last one, but I did work with someone who laughed at me when I just asked, like 2 weeks into the trip, like, when are we could we take a shower sometime? So, like, this is a real thing. That's that's not a joke, that hygiene can be part of your identity. Yeah, so I think so identity, I think, is one huge sphere that I think we've touched on thus far. And some other points I think that we've also hit on are safety. And I think safety can be both physical as well as psychological. Like, do you feel like you belong in the field? And I think a final theme I'd like to mention is accountability. I think, again, maybe at least in my field, I don't know, in your disciplines as well, there can be a bit of an attitude about like, well, what happens in the field stays in the field, or like, yeah, well, you know, I can say things or do things I definitely wouldn't do like in an office or in a lab. And so I think something that I've worked on doing is developing mechanisms for accountability so that that behavior can be reported and then hopefully addressed beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that folks have said. I think financial barriers are incredibly obvious at field stations where we have to charge students for field courses, and those usually cost more than on-campus courses. So there are, you know, we've been working on ways to try and address that. And this year, for the first year, we're able to use donation money to offset the cost of all field courses. So they don't cost more than on campus, but they still cost the same as on campus, which is, you know, expensive. Representation, I totally agree with as well. I think the thing I'm really thinking about now is as we make changes to policies at field stations, for example, the evaluation frameworks for understanding if they're working is a really challenging piece. Like, how do you know if you're being inclusive? Have you thought about that? I've thought about that a lot, and it's different for different people. You can have reporting structures, but you know, we have, I think, pretty great reporting structures at our field station through the LTR that's been there for a long time, and in collaboration with them. And every year, despite what we think is a really great inclusive structure for reporting, we find out through an anonymous post-season survey that something wasn't reported. And it drives me nuts because we've got all this training, we have all this expertise to help people. We care a lot about students and researchers feeling safe in the field, and they still don't tell us. And so clearly we're doing something wrong. I don't know what that is yet, but I think that's a huge challenge to know, like whether the way you're designing a field team or the way you're even trying to offset financial costs are achieving the goals that you have. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately.
We can probably use the two mics.
I think just like echoing what other folks have said, but I'm also just like reflecting on my interviews with people that I think one barrier, I think for a lot of the fields represented, like the archetype of who does the field work is usually just like an old white guy. For archaeology, typically it's it's Indiana Jones or paleontologist, because no one knows what archaeology is. And so I think like one of the issues is like, one, how do you make these fields like relevant to younger people? There's a program that Dr. Alexandra Jones has in DC called Archaeology in the Community, where she works with, I think like elementary and middle school age Black kids in DC, where like you're showing them like, here's what archaeology can do. Here's what you can do if you want to be an archaeologist. So starting before people are in college, where like the pervasive image of like, I don't know, Indiana Jones doing his like illegal looting is like your only image of what an archaeologist or what a field researcher can be. And also, I'm also thinking about how like a lot of schools that do like serve like minority students, like HBCUs, don't have a lot of these like programs in the social sciences and sciences. Like Howard no longer has an anthropology department. Like there's still professors there, but it's been folded. So also like the people that you might even want to do fieldwork programs in their universities don't have that. And so I know there's a program, I think it's like some UC school like has a program with an HBCU for those students, but like it's also just inaccessible to a lot of students at these universities. And also because the outcome in the fields are not like super great. Encouraging people to continue like past their undergrad is also a hard sell when you look at the job market.
So a couple of points I wanted to add to both of your points actually is one, so as a first generation college student that like I in high school really burned both ends of the candle to be able to get a lot of scholarship money because I knew that I was not going to college if I couldn't perform well enough to get someone else to pay for it. And when I got to my geology department and they started advertising for field classes were not covered under scholarship money, or at the very least, like field classes also, because they're more expensive. There's like a lot of places the field courses are more expensive. they would not pay the difference. So it would have had to, like, I think the difference was $500 and it would have come out of my pocket on top of traveling expenses. So I was like, well, guess I'm not going into the field. So that was wild to me that like you could be on scholarship and there's classes you just can't take because they're like, no, we're not going to do this. I don't know if that's changed in the interim years, but that's a thing to think about, that even if students are coming in with their own funding, field courses sometimes are just not even applicable to that. And I was lucky because my department didn't require you to have a field course to get your, because I have a bachelor's in geophysics. I was able to get field experience other ways, but like if I had not already been part of a group that did field work outside that I joined in high school, I would not have been able to get any field experience at all. That's one thing. And a note on what you said about like jobs afterwards and like where, I think one of the things that we don't think about enough is, I was talking with a lot of students recently who are talking about how, especially if they're from a background where they're in a low income community and they're like, I really just want to make enough money to start building generational wealth. They don't usually think of things like geology first, they think of business. But there is a lot of money in geophysicals, geosciences and field work if you're in industry. And I know we all love science, we all love basic science and we love research and that's our jam. So we don't often think about how like I could bring a person from industry to talk to these students about how they can make $65,000 a year with a bachelor's in some of these fields. That is life-changing money. That is get out of poverty money. But they're toiling away at a business degree because they think that's where the money is. And I think that we don't do a good job of showing, yeah, there's a lot of things that we do that are not really, they're not really lucrative, right? Like you have to kind of stay at it and the job prospects are wild. But there are a lot of places where students can get this fieldwork experience, go through it, and then still come out with a job that is more money than they thought they would make ever in their life. So I think we need to think about that too when we're thinking about what we're exposing our students to and how they can use that fieldwork later.
No, that was great. Thank you. No, I really appreciate all of those comments. And I think we're seeing a couple of themes here. I mean, we're talking a lot about trainees here, and in the breakout groups, we will be talking about people at sort of all levels of the pipeline. And it obviously has to be something that whatever strategies we implement are going to have to address issues at each of those levels. And as we kind of all know, there's an attrition effect, right? Where that stick with itness can only take you so far, especially if you have personal circumstances that make it more and more challenging for you to just kind of persist in the system long enough to be able to get to the next stage and the next stage, and that those challenges are magnified, depending on a range of factors. And I guess one of the hypotheses that I have that I'm working with is that field work could be a unique set of challenges when you're already trying to, stick with it in a particular area of study. And that when you encounter that moment when you want to do field work, but you can't, or maybe you don't really know what would be involved with field work, or you want to do it, you can do it, but you feel like it might be a little bit weird or unsafe, or you can't really see anyone around you doing it. That presents, I think, an extraordinary extra set of obstacles. So it's actually not a great thing, but it's also encouraging to see that there's some common themes here across all of these different disciplines. And so that kind of means hopefully that whatever solutions there are could also productively be implemented. And I think one of the things that happens is we don't have a critical mass necessarily of people who kind of are engaged in field practice, because we're all scattered in different departments. We do it to different degrees and it looks different. So it's harder to coordinate these efforts and say, hey, there's a lot of people who would really benefit from efforts that were put into X, Y, Z, and then be able to demonstrate that out. So in the theme of solutions, what would be the solution? I've heard about financial barriers, representation. What would you foresee as being the kind of, the game changer in your case?
I'm going to keep talking if no one takes the mic from me. I think one of the strongest things that we can do that like everyone in this audience can do kind of right off the bat is think about how you can broadcast in that kind of first interaction, whether it's on a forum where you're advertising your field program or whatever it is, that you are that you want to talk more if the person has any kind of like questions or concerns or anything like that. One of the things that we've also seen in research is that students who maybe they're first generation, maybe they don't have, like, maybe they just don't have a good idea of how college is supposed to work. They have this idea that if they're struggling with something or if they have concerns, it's on them, and they either like suffer through it or they just don't go. So if you have a field program and it says, oh, it's $500 and there are scholarships, and you're waiting for someone to come to you and ask about that, they're going to assume there's no scholarship. So you kind of have to put it all forward. Like, there's money if you don't have money. If you have concerns, I want to hear them. I want to talk to you about them. One of the things that I've done, and this is not field work, but this is a class that I teach, is I've started being extremely explicit at the beginning of class that we're all different people. We all have different circumstances. We all have different struggles. If there's anything going on with you in this class that is barring you from participating fully, come talk to me. And what I found is that a lot of students, after talking to me about lots of things, I've had a student come and say, I was doing a ride along with the police department and I saw someone die last night. My grandmother has dementia and I was up all night because she thought we had kidnapped her. Like, these crazy things that they thought they could not tell me because they don't have a doctor's note. That is the only thing to them. A lot of students, you don't have some sort of official person saying this is forgivable. They'll just assume that it's their problem and that they have to struggle through whatever they're going through. So when we take that back to field work and we think, okay, a student who might be a student is worried about going to Texas where there are a lot of Confederate flags and they're Black, or they're non-binary, or they're trans and they're worried about bathrooms. They're not going to just volunteer that information off the bat if they don't think you're going to be receptive to hearing it. So I think the easiest thing to do right away is to establish yourself as someone who's safe to talk to those concerns about, and that you want them to come to you, like inviting them so that they know that you're not just going to be sucks for you, that you're actually like, we can work this out together. Because the standard assumption is that no one's going to help them, that it's on them.
Yeah, and I think going with that, even some of the smaller things that people may or may not think about can be really helpful, even if it is small. Like, one of the things that I do through Field Inclusive is a field gear closet. Also trying to establish that on the department too. It's just kind of encouraging people to donate new, gently used field supplies that students can like check out and use for like a class. Like, if you're only taking one fisheries class and you need an expensive pair of waders to take it, you might not have that money to spend on a pair of waders and thus can't take the class. And so just being able to have some of those equipment around for people to use, and other just like small little things, like you said, excusing life circumstances without a doctor's note has been a huge thing for me, especially this semester. And just understanding where students are coming from. I think it really all goes back to that, and being just like, flexible and willing to work with people. I think going back to the barriers that we talked about, one of the hugest things is just like older professors just saying, well, it was this way when I went through it and I got to where I am now, so it'll be fine. It's like, but times are changing and it's not fine. And also, you don't have all of these identities that make it harder for you to get where you are. So just doing things like that, even if it's small and it might not seem like, giving everybody a free scholarship or something like that. I think the little things still do help people.
And also, that's how we got here to a not diverse field, is doing things the way they did it. That was just fine.
Yeah, so one policy change that I've brought to my past two departments has been developing a fieldwork code of conduct, which is really just making explicit some of the goals just shared by Murray and Elena. In terms of, so this is a document, you can find it on the Yale EPS department website. You are also welcome to copy and paste it and use it in your own departments. I'm just gonna give my permission right now for that. And this document sets out the expectations for how we expect trip leaders and trip participants to be dedicated to promoting an inclusive environment in the field. We set out expectations for what should happen before anybody leads a trip. And this is the onus being on the trip leaders to have a conversation with all participants in the trip, whether that's a class, whether that's your graduate students or your undergrad assistants, to say, this is where we're going. You know, I've done some risk assessment. I think we might need to be concerned about these things. Can I talk to you about your needs and your concerns and what I can do to help you address them? If you haven't been camping before, do we want to, you know, work on that and like talk through what that's like, or go set up at a tent or go on a hike together? What can we do to make you feel more comfortable before we get there? Our department's also developed a standardized like dietary and health questionnaire, the response of which will be shared confidentially or with the trip leaders, just so they, you know, need to know like, okay, if you have this sort of emergency, what can I expect and what can I do? Can I be prepared? And helping you through that. And then we have just a list of expectations of behavior on the trip, both in a positive way that we expect this to be a learning experience and a growth experience, but also like, you know, this sort of behavior or, you know, drinking to excess, bullying, et cetera, are not allowed. And we even list out some consequences as well to what will happen if these behaviors aren't followed. A crucial counterpart to this as well is we developed a post-trip questionnaire that's hosted by Qualtrics, our university's preferred surveying system, that could go out to all participants on a trip afterwards to just assess how well the fieldwork code of conduct was upheld, and also track patterns of behavior to find if there are patterns of behavior of certain individuals in a department who aren't living up to those standards. And yes, the studies show that simply having a fieldwork code of conduct does improve outcomes for those participating in fieldwork, and having mechanisms of accountability and consequences specified for not following that code even further improves outcomes for participation in fieldwork. So I think that is a small, seemingly small thing. Maybe it looks like a piece of paper, but could hopefully lead to better outcomes for all involved.
I mean, I think in terms of what I've seen improve the most since I was in the field in, you know, isolated islands off the coast of Peru, I didn't really have a field safety plan, which was dumb. So I think like there's been a lot of improvements in this realm. So thinking about actual physical safety, there are, you know, the NSF now requires field safety plans, or will very soon. I can't remember, but that's like a really encouraging improvement, because if you're sending students abroad, you should have thought about all the risks. It is kind of on you as a PI. So I think that's kind of where I've seen the most improvement overall with respect to inclusion in field safety, or inclusion in the field, and what makes you feel included. But yeah, the financial barriers that people have been talking about, I have seen fewer improvements there. And, you know, I also couldn't afford to do any field experiences at all as an undergraduate student, because I was paying for my own degree, and that was in Canada, where it's much cheaper than here. So, you know, these experiences are not accessible to most of our students without really thoughtful commitment to trying to offset the costs for them. And that's really hard to do, you know, unless you just have some really wealthy person who gives you millions of dollars, and you can use that to offset the cost of a course. But then it just opens up a world of possibilities for students who can take them. So I've been really focused, I guess, as the director of our station, on figuring out more ways to lower the financial burden, while thinking about everything that people are thinking about. But yeah, there's a lot more to do and to think about, particularly with respect to, like I said earlier, how to, I mean, you can evaluate inclusion in a way, but it's still, I think, pretty challenging.
I think that we have, you know, there's a couple things here. One of them is that as somebody who was a trainee and then became a PI, and I had my world of experience in front of me that I could draw from, but every year there's some new issue, right? That I'd never thought of, because I had never personally had that come up before. And it shouldn't really be like that from the PI perspective either, where you're kind of having to deal with things, you know, as they come at you. And, you know, this idea that there's a standardized list of like, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? Would be incredibly helpful, I think, for everybody, because it prepares the people who maybe haven't had that much experience, but it also makes sure that the people who are leading these things, you know, they don't find themselves in a situation where something that they hadn't ever even thought of comes up. And I think that that's going to save a lot of time probably as well, if there's already kind of a standard set of common things here that we can reference. And I know that coming from perspectives like, say, you know, if I'd been camping a bunch And then I had this idea in my head about what camping entailed. That is not the same idea that everybody who hears the word camping thinks. And there's lots of different things that that could mean, and facilities that could be or not be there and that sort of thing. So there's, you have to be really explicit and, sometimes quite personal. Like, what do you plan to do as a woman if you're menstruating in the field? Has anybody actually sat you down and talked to you about that? Is it in the guidebook? Like, these are things that come up that you don't really necessarily think of in advance because you just sort of got this deal with it culture. And, be tough, get through it, don't say anything. No one else is saying anything, so you would feel awkward saying something. So, that's just one example of how your personal identity can in very small ways kind of erode a sense of belonging, or that you're demanding something extra from, the group, and nobody else is dealing with this, when probably a lot of people actually are. So I think that those sorts of standards would be extremely helpful, but at the same time, you don't want them to be overly, like inappropriate to the particular situation you're in either, because there's a lot of variation in how field work is conducted. So that's going to be, I think, one of the tricky things that we have to actually do. I think that we can move on to some questions here if you want to, unless anybody else has anything that they wanted to add.
I just wanted to add something just really quick to your comment about standards, and keep talking forever. And to your comment about the NSF having a document about, so I actually recently had to fill out the version that they currently have because I was submitting a grant that was, part of the proposal was that we're going to have 2 graduate students that trade labs, like me and another collaborator in North Dakota. Our graduate students are going to, my graduate student is going to go there and work with their graduate student for a semester, and their graduate student is going to come here. And they're like, okay, you need to fill out this document to talk about like safety planning and stuff like that. And I was like, great, what should it look like? And they're like, I don't know. I think the office is like, I don't know. I think they just want to see that you thought about it. And I was like, that is not good enough. Yeah. And at this point, like, I feel like I have enough background knowledge myself to do a good job. But like, if you've never thought about some of these things and you don't have any resource for the things you're supposed to consider, it's insane to think anyone's just off the top of their head gonna hit all of the points that are necessary. So that was, I don't know if NSF is gonna, like, in the guidebook put some more detailed information, but like, it was a very sparse form that I did not think that, like, and institutionally there was just no guidance because it was so new. That I think that's an issue, like the things to think about, like, as that form is going to be more and more used.
Okay, great. Should we try to grab some questions from people maybe in the room that might have come up, as well as we've got some questions in the Q&A. Here's somebody with a question.
Hello. Okay. I guess it's not a question, but like a probe for more information. Scott, you'd mentioned earlier about the ableist nature of fieldwork. And I was wondering if you'd done some thinking about that, if there were ways that, like, maybe that you haven't had a chance to implement yet, but like how you were thinking about sort of lowering the bar to entry for people with different body types and abilities.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it, since becoming the director of the field station, having, being contacted by certain groups of students or the public and them wanting to get to the Arctic tundra alpine habitat, which at our station requires driving in a suburban for 3 miles up a Forest Service road that you can still drive on, and then parking and hiking for 1.5 miles, again, at elevation. I would say I haven't come up with any great solutions other than being really explicit in the beginning about what is possible and what may be challenging, and then providing alternative solutions for, if this physically is not possible to get to the very highest elevation, like how else can you have a really rich experience at our field station? But there are so many things I just don't think about. We were hosting a graduate student like pre-semester community building NSF funded project for 2 years. And because of CU Boulder's policies at the time, I couldn't require masking. But one of those students was immunocompromised and wanted me to, but I legally couldn't. And, it was a very, and that was also ableist, that no one had to mask because none of us had immunocompromised scenarios except this one student. And so again, I didn't come up with a great solution for that, although, we had community conversations with the rest of the class and there was masking that happened. But with respect to the other employees at the field station, I couldn't even address it. So I think like thinking creatively about ways for people to experience your field station to its maximum without necessarily, at least at ours, going all the way up to 12,000 feet is one route. But, looking for ways to raise money to have better vehicles, or, I used to work at a park on Lake Erie, and everyone wanted to go out to the dunes. You can't go into dunes in a normal wheelchair. You need like one of those, like a fat tire wheelchair kind of thing. And so we raised money to buy one that people could then rent to get out there and actually experience what was one of the coolest parts of that park. So I think you need to think creatively about ways to do that. And there are just some obstacles at our field station I haven't been able to overcome. But we do have these, like, I don't want to call them contingency plans, but like multi-option plans, such that if we run into those challenges, we can address them and people still have a good time. The nice thing about our field station is like the main site is at 9,500 feet. So if you drive from Denver to the field station, it's like driving 3,500 kilometers north. So even that is very different, and they can have this really cool experience, at an alpine stream, even if it's not the tundra. So being creative and having those conversations with other people is something I want to do more of. But it's always, and like Jess said, there are so many things I just don't think about, right? Because of my own experience, it was not until I was 25 years old that I realized that walking behind a woman at night was stressful for her. I'm like, I'm a gay man. I should have known that. I don't know. But it took me that long because I'm 6 feet tall and I'm white. And so I've never, it's the same kind of shit where you just have to be really thoughtful and ask as many questions as you can so that you can change things. And even like, I'm just drawn on a little bit. So a lot of people teach courses at our field station. And I'm really concerned about the way those courses are being taught. Back to what Nala was talking about, in a way that the how faculty relate to students at field courses is different than in the classroom. The examples they use might be different in terms of inspiring students to care about nature, where they might not resonate with students. They might even alienate students if they didn't have the experience of going canoeing with their families, or the reason they like science is Pokemon, not because they were like me catching salamanders because they couldn't catch salamanders. So thinking about the ways that courses are taught and the examples that are used is another piece that I'm trying to implement at our field station to try and address, maybe less the ableist piece, but the inclusion piece. Yeah.
And I'll also just quickly add that plugging Field Inclusive, on our website, we have a page dedicated to resources like that, just like code of conduct templates, safety gear templates, and one of the things like coming soon is a field work accessibility kind of checklist, going through all the questions from big pictures like, do you need to do field work for this research? Can you collect remote data and stuff like that, all the way down to kind of like, do you have digital tools that can like read out the number for people? Or if you're tagging organisms, do you have like a colorblind palette for tagging? So just various things like that. Field Inclusive is working on a whole bunch of different resources like that.
Yeah, and I'll just add on one more thing that I need to pay more attention to Field Inclusive. But another thing I've been noticing is the need for emotional support animals has increased a lot, or the requests for them. So historically at our field stations, dogs were not allowed. We can't do that anymore. And so thinking about how to be flexible and supportive with those policies has been really interesting and quite successful at the field station. But again, I just got my first dog during COVID, and I never really thought about how, if you need to have a dog with you, there's all these things you need to think about, even just the capacity of the vehicles you have. So we've been working on those sorts of things as well.
I'd like to actually ask you a question about your website. So first of all, those resources sound awesome for faculty, and I will want that linked because I want to go there. But do you also have resources for like the student side of, like, in terms of field work, like how to talk to your professor if you have concerns? Like, because I was just thinking about it as I sat here now, like, not only I think would it be helpful for faculty to get more comfortable with the idea of, I don't know everything in everyone's experience, I need to be curious about it and proactive in getting it, but also like supporting students who just need more confidence, or maybe how to even start that conversation because they don't know how to go about it. Is that something that is there already, or like,
another thing in progress as well, like guide to like difficult conversations or like guidelines to someone at the city, I don't know where I call it. But yeah, something like that will also be in place.
Super excited.
Yeah, because there's always a concern, isn't there, that you don't want somebody to feel pressured to reveal something that they feel is personal and that they don't want to talk about either. So, you know, they might have something that they haven't even thought about as something they would want to talk about, and it's good for you to bring it out. And then on the other hand, you might have somebody who feels that they're being singled out because you're mentioning something and it might be obvious that they're the only person in the room or in the group that you're taking that has that issue. So, you know, kind of having those conversations in a way that can make people feel like they're not asking something that is extraordinarily difficult, or they're not going to get labeled by their peers as, you know, that difficult person is really hard. It's a really tricky thing to try to navigate. Anybody else have any thing they want to add about that? We can go to another question.
Thanks. I really appreciate you all sort of touching on the like financial burden that like doing field work has for students. I just wanted to sort of, I guess, ask your opinion on one thing that we do at our site is offer like paid positions at the field station to like allow graduate students, RAs, and undergrads to make money while they're actually at the field station doing field work so that they can have some income, as opposed to students who, right, they're not getting paid necessarily, or their living expenses are getting covered, so they're not generating income during these long field seasons. But one thing that is kind of the backside to that is that then we end up having like this visible hierarchy of like students who do need to like, or are interested in picking up these extra monetary jobs at the field station versus students who clearly don't, or like don't have an interest in it. So yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that model and like, yeah, does having these paid opportunities for work at the field station to like help maintain certain things there also, like we sort of hope increases people's like buy-in to the station and their inclusivity at the site, but it kind of has had some like negative effects as well. So yeah, just curious as to what you all think about that model and if it makes sense to work with.
Could you clarify for me, like can you clarify me the negative impact that you're seeing? Like what is the?
Yeah. So yeah, like we will have like dishwashing jobs that like some undergrads could sign up for to take on because we have like too much dishwashing to do at the stage. Like, you know, a lot of these places are understaffed, so there's not enough people to do it. So they offer like a paid option that graduate students or anyone working there could take on. But that's like a very visible role where the people that are taking on those roles like are doing them to get more money. So yeah, that there's just no way getting around it, I guess. Like that's just the nature of the economy of the field station. Like they have work and they need people to do it. But yeah, I guess I'm not aware of any other sites that are doing that. So I was just kind of curious as to what you all think about, like, it does like lower like the barrier to access for a lot of students because they're able to have these like paid jobs while they're doing these field internships that are unpaid.
So just to share the implication for just for everyone, like, so what you're saying is basically this seems to then create this class divide between people who are there where like some students get to do whatever and some have to then go wash dishes.
Exactly.
Like, I'm just going to speak for myself personally as a person that would have benefited from that kind of thing. I understand your concern. And I think that in the cosmos, it is like an issue, but I would have jumped at that chance because even though it does then have these implications of, okay, now this person has to do work and this person does, it would have still allowed me to participate in something that would have been totally barred to me otherwise. Because otherwise I would have had to get a job somewhere else, maybe at McDonald's, and that is not as enriching. So I think my personal opinion is in terms of these kind of situations, as long as you are then addressing if the students are forming cliques and like saying rude things to each other, if you notice social implications of that, where like people are being insulted or something like that, addressing that is important. But just on the surface of it, to me, offering those positions, I think is a boon that I would have loved because it would have been more access. But my opinion is not the only one.
No, I was just gonna add, I would make everybody have a job. Just,
Me too.
like, and nobody knows who's getting paid for it, who's not, like, everybody just takes care of the field station altogether. The biggest solution though is to abolish unpaid internships.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So as the director of our field station, I don't allow unpaid internships to exist at the station. And I have to approve everyone's research proposals, and I haven't incorporated that explicit question into it yet, but it's going to be incorporated for next field season. And if they answer yes, there'll be a conversation. And, you know, I completely agree. Unpaid research internships are a huge barrier to everything. We don't take volunteers in my lab, and I'm going to do my best to prevent that from happening at our station because it's just not equitable in any way. We don't have the same kind of setup that you're talking about, but I can see that, yeah, I'd not allow unpaid internships first. And if they had to exist for whatever reason, I do think that's an okay solution. You just have to manage the community, but yeah.
There was another question. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we got some from online.
Yeah, so I have some online questions. We've got about 4, but I'll just start with one. So related to making things more accessible in the field, we have a question from a Black woman in the geosciences who wants you to know that she's rooting for the other Black field scientists. And she says, do we think any technologies that are increasingly available now, like ArcGIS, drones, robots, can they help increase accessibility or safety in the field?
I can't speak to safety, but I'm wary of trying to use technology to fix a structural problem of like racism. I don't know if that's actually possible. And in my own fieldwork, I've seen people use like VR and other forms of like mapping to do. I don't even know how to like describe it, but just using forms of like digital representations of like slave sites in certain ways to like make things accessible for people that can't get there in ways that are problematic and offensive. So I think in some ways they're useful, but like I would deeply hesitate to be like, you know, technology. But yeah, I struggle with that as like a solution to those sorts of deeply entrenched problems that are even within the technology that exists.
So for something like if you're going to like a geological outcrop that doesn't have a cultural component to it at all, I think that there's some value in the ability to use some of this technology to create virtual programs that give students who otherwise can't get into the field more access to seeing things in situ, in actual, like, as opposed to like diagrams in a book or that kind of thing. I think one of my concerns about that with something like geology is that we'll then create the situation where a lot of students who already have a lot of access still get to go into the field and everyone else is relegated to a virtual thing it's great and it's an improvement, but it's still not equitable. So that we're not I think that there's a lot of room for technology to improve access for a lot of different groups, but I worry that we'll lean on it to just say this is good enough and not actually do the harder work of making sure there's more integration. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Yes. I meant yes. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think from a drones perspective and a data collection perspective that there's been huge growth in drone use at our field station for collecting a lot of aspects of data about forest height or composition that I guess in theory could allow an individual who wasn't for whatever reason able to go out into the woods to collect the data to collect it. I don't think we have a specific example of that happening at our station, but I can see how that might be a useful tool. But yeah, I kind of agree with what Nala said at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, another online question.
Another one related to how we interact in the field. How can the field be more inclusive for neurodivergent people? In my experience, a lack of personal space at field stations and pressure to take part in social events has been really challenging. Any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts. I think a lot of the things that we're dealing with have, to a certain extent, at least some financial solution. So lack of personal space can come from also just lack of investment in infrastructure or kind of scraping together enough funding to try to get the maximum number of people who could participate to participate. And the consequences that, things can get crowded or You can also even have logistical things come up, like a field vehicle conks out, and suddenly now people are, really squashed in there with a bunch of equipment, trying to make do while it's getting repaired. And these are unanticipated things that can, I think, to a certain extent, be mitigated with better facilities, by putting money into facilities and improving them in ways that would actually kind of have that in mind. And so I think that could be at least one piece of it. I'm sure it's not the whole piece of the puzzle, but just thinking about what could be practical to implement, rather than, exclusively relying on people to sort of just change their behavior, might be something that we could, that we could sort of advocate for collectively.
Yeah, and I'd also just like to point out that often, accommodations or extra considerations we might make for people who are neurodivergent or have other needs could often improve the experience of everyone on the trip. And so, I don't know, for those of us who have been in the field, like who would benefit from saying like, you know what, before dinner, we have 30 minutes of alone time. Good for everyone. And so, yeah, I think having the conversations with participants ahead of time and really centering like what are their needs, and again, broadening that for the benefit of the entire group, I think is a really promising way forward.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of negative scenarios arise because of ignorance typically, and not usually because people are trying to be malicious by scheduling all kinds of time together or whatever. And I think that creating a community that communicates effectively and feels safe in their communication is a really key piece to all of this, and acknowledging upfront that different people have different needs depending on the structure of whatever it is, if it's a research field team or a class or whatever. And then, doing your best to create a community wherein a student or a member of your team would actually tell you prior to becoming a problem, and you could plan for that and then kind of incorporate it. And the more examples you have to provide when you start that conversation and you show that you actually are someone who cares and wants to plan to make this the best experience for everyone, the better. I think that, again, those conversations often don't happen because we don't necessarily have those experiences to draw on, but by coming to something like this and thinking about more examples that we might want to think about in that first email that you send out to your class of students that's arriving in 2 weeks or whatever, the better. So.
Any more questions out in the live questions? We'll do a live question. There's a couple back there.
I think I'll go first.
Yep.
So some great points were made about individual conduct and accountability. I'm just thinking about institutional accountability and your experience with some of those. You all mentioned representation and how important that is, but we know that research and higher ed institutions are not diversifying as fast as other institutions. A study from last year estimated that it's going to take over 50 years for parity with the diversity that we see in society. So not doing a great job. You also mentioned about how important is being flexible and creating that belonging environment in the classroom. And then we know that during hiring processes, they're going to look at number of papers that you publish and how much money you're bringing to the institution. So I'm curious if you have like good examples of policies that are really translating into changing, going beyond the statements that all the institutions are putting in the website and not really following through, and just, get a more uplifting message or example that you get, because as you talk to folks, that is not the reality for most of the places, particularly for very, liberal progressive spaces like states like New England that, are really proud, and that is not really translating into hiring practices that reflect that.
Yeah, unless anybody else wants to say something first, I'm just going to say that I haven't seen any policies being implemented on institutional levels. And that's where I think a lot of the advocacy work is heading towards and trying to get. In my work, I've been just like chipping small pieces away at institutions like, okay, let's do a field gear closet. Or if you have to take your personal vehicle into the field, let's put like a car magnet that says you're a researcher with this institution. And I'm also just like the first Black professor in my department as of 2023. So like, it's a lot of people who haven't had to think about these things in the like 100 years of the department existing. And I think it's going to take a lot of time because a lot of people is just the lack of awareness or also the attitude of like, well, I did it, so blah, blah, blah. But yeah, unfortunately, there really aren't any policies that I've seen being in place. But I think one thing that helps to kind of get people to come on board is seeing those results. Like they'll see that, oh, we have these resources, now the students are using them. And like now more people are participating in XYZ program or anything. I've even had professors say like, are those students in your office? Like you have students like coming to you to talk to you? It's like, yeah, like, you know, so it's like, they say that's not a common thing, which I didn't know, but yeah, they're in my office talking to me. So just seeing that some of this stuff does work, I think encourages people to start to implement some of those policies.
I'd also like to, remind everyone that apart from Scott here, our distinguished senior colleague, we're all incredibly early on in our careers. Associate, tenured, woo, yeah. So I think, and yeah, from people in my own network and what you're seeing here, a lot of the energy for really pursuing and working to implement these initiatives, even when it feels like we're chipping away one tiny thing by one tiny thing, is kind of coming from the ground up. And so that's why I just like to reiterate the importance of tenured and senior faculty and department leadership. I'm really lucky that my department chair in Yale EPS has been a fantastic advocate and supporter of anything I could suggest to improve fieldwork and inclusivity. So yeah, like when we do want to have this institutional accountability or maybe a change in the way we assess promotion, we're going to need allies at more senior levels to continue to promote these activities and new approaches to inclusivity that we're discussing today.
Yeah, I think I can second that, you know, I think there's like many of these sorts of tasks, they tend to fall on particular people and, or particular people who have those experiences tend to be most determined to help make sure other people don't have those same experiences, but that comes at a cost, right? That's time, that's effort, that's typically lauded, but not necessarily credited in a real way. When it comes to things like how much service does one have to do in order to achieve X, Y, Z milestone in the institution. So, you know, a lot of this work it seems to be coming, you know, from kind of the emerging research community, but needs to be heavily supported by people who have been in it a lot longer. There's some questions back there also.
Hi, hello. I'm really interested in this piece about the role that trust plays in the field and like building trust in order to build community. And so I was wondering if you could speak to strategies that you have used to build trust in different time constraints, like bringing someone out into the field for a day, let's say, versus a 3-week summer camp versus a longer term relationship. And can you provide a little bit of context about like, well, what would it take to rebuild trust? Like we are learning and are bound to make mistakes. And so do you have an example of like a learning moment for you to rebuild trust in field settings as well?
A really good question.
All right, so I think I have an example. So this was a trip that I was not the leader on. I was like the co-leader, so I wasn't the direct leader. But we had a lot of students in the field in Wyoming, and we had an individual at a location come up the individual came up and tried to be very cheerful and welcoming and be like, "Are you the colored students we saw at the park earlier?" Of course, this is very inappropriate. This person was 80, probably didn't know it was inappropriate. The students came back, we had a discussion about it together, but the way the head leader had kind of talked about it, it's like, oh, he's just old and he doesn't know better. Later, one of our team leaders was like, when you said that, oh, he's old and it doesn't know better, let's just brush it off. It felt like you were excusing him and not taking seriously how much it hurt, even though he didn't have any ill intentions. And she was like, you are absolutely correct. So I think that then that led to a discussion about what is the better way to go about that? How could I have supported you better? So I think there's a lot, especially if you are a white person in the moment that someone says this is inappropriate, like a lot of people have that initial like offense, like I did something wrong and you want to be defensive. And I think the first step is to take that and just like, just swallow it, right? That you are told that you did something that hurt someone, even if you didn't mean it, just kind of let that go. Like, you were wrong, let it go. Don't get defensive. And then ask how you can do better, which I also realize that does then put the burden on the person that was hurt to inform you and educate you. But in the moment, in the fields like situation, I think it's important to acknowledge that you have heard that you made a mistake and you want to not repeat that mistake with that particular person and do better.
I think a lot of trust building also happens before you sometimes even meet somebody in person, and the amount of information and the quality of information that you give people in advance can help build a sense of confidence that they might have in you and that you're somebody that they could trust with other things. So I think that, over the years, I continue to build out as each of these new things comes up, longer and longer and longer field preparation information packet, which has become enormous. And then, then that itself is also a burden to try to sort through it and read it and figure out what it all is. So, but at least the information is becoming more explicit, and it's starting to be in there in a way, I think, that makes people feel like, oh, if I have a question about this sensitive topic, there's actually a section on it in this huge document, which means this person has thought about it, which means they have experience with it, which means I probably can trust them with it. I think that just setting expectations. I once asked a colleague about what to do with people who are neurodiverse in the field and have all different ways in which they would need to be able to interact with the environment and other people. And, their advice was excellent. It was like, if you set expectations, that can go so far, because then nobody's being taken by surprise. And I find that was probably one of the most wonderful pieces of advice I've ever gotten, irrespective of your neurotype, because it was really about people thinking they're signing up for one thing and then feeling violated when they find that it's different. And so the more we can preempt that, I think the better we're going to do with that aspect of things.
Yeah, and I just thought too that I think validating students' experiences goes a long way in building trust. I think people get kind of stuck on like science should be as objective as possible and like this is correct, everything else is wrong. But even having, like, for example, taking students birding, I was like, okay, this is called a northern cardinal, and having students like, oh, my family calls that a red bird. It's like, that's fine, that's correct. It's just like, and I'll use those names interchangeably. So like, where'd you see the red bird? It's like all that kind of stuff. And also just kind of like taking people's experiences and either trying to incorporate it into the content that you're teaching or in some way validating that. Another example is that being from the deep South, there's a lot of superstitions around blackbirds, and just like not telling people that they're wrong about those, but trying to relate, okay, you have these superstitions, but also they're still ecologically important, and here's why, and trying to have those relatable conversations with people, I think goes a long way.
I know I saw another hand up there, and I think, do we have another one from the Q&A also? Okay, we'll do this one in person, and then we'll do the Q&A next.
Hi. So I had a question about, I guess, because we talk about accessibility often in terms of like physical accessibility. And we touched a little bit on like neurodivergence, but I'm thinking like the mental toll that fieldwork often takes on people. And I can really only speak for myself, but like being a PhD student, I'm in the field a lot, and our mental health services sort of like end the minute that I leave New Haven. And so they are like, we're taking all these like forms and filling them out. Like, what do you do if you get bit? What do you do if you get sick? And then it's like, well, what do you do if something goes horribly wrong and you're having a mental breakdown? Or what do you do if you're having some other sort of like mental emergency? And I don't know how necessarily to fix that, because I understand that people's licenses, as far as like therapy or something goes, extends only to the state. But I don't know if there's anything that you guys have done implementing in your own field work that has tried to mitigate some of that, those challenges that people might face.
Although, this is not something I have dealt with directly. One thing we did include in our code of conduct is, first of all, like making sure that we have a satellite phone. We make it clear that anybody can use that satellite phone, not just the field trip leader. And then we also say, like, if for any reason you feel like you need to get out and leave the field area, and that is a severe answer, like I think an intermediate answer to your question would be a little better, but just noting that we make all participants aware that, they can call our designated point of contact and exit as needed, which could hopefully at least lead to one outcome to satisfy like a real crisis situation, and know that they're not stuck until their plane ticket says they have to go home.
So I teach a field course that takes students to the Amazon, the Galapagos, and the high elevation cloud forests in Ecuador. And I mean, I experienced my own mental health crisis when I was doing field work in South America, and there was no solution. It was just read this book 5 times, hope for the best, and you'll get home eventually, which was not the right solution, but there was no plan. So when I'm taking students abroad, I have pretty explicit discussions now just about like the extra stress that happens when you're in the field, you're away from home, and just sometimes I've found getting people to think about that prior to leaving, although I can't say like there will be X resource in this place for you. It takes away some of the unknown, and I've found that has helped with outcomes, at least in the field, when a student is experiencing whatever it is, if it's anxiety or depression, that having had those conversations, they'll come and talk to me about it before it becomes just a problem that's unsolvable. But those kinds of conversations were not ones that I ever had with my PI. I mean, I love her. She was great for so many reasons, but we never talked about like, what if you feel like you need to leave, but you can't leave? So I've tried to have more explicit conversations about what can go wrong in the field, both on the course I teach in South America, as well as at the field station I direct. Our field station is quite accessible though. So when we have had students experiencing a mental health crisis, they can go get the resources they need. And those are available for students taking field courses, even if they're not students at CU. So that helps. Yeah.
Okay, another one from the Q&A.
So we've got a few that are related. I'm going to kind of combine them. One of the questions was about how you can make students feel comfortable bringing up their needs with you. And somebody else was asking if maybe universities or graduate programs could make courses that help field research make the transition from being a student who's in the field to a PI with students who's in the field. So maybe we can sort of talk about those things together a little bit.
Yeah, I know one thing that I do to try to encourage my students to like open up, I'm a safe person, is to kind of disclose some of my own needs that I have for the field, and just letting them know that like, hey, I'm this professor and a PI, but I still need some type of accommodations. I still need breaks sometimes. And I know this other thing might be more so related to like physical needs, but what I try to implement in my lab is to give everybody like a medical card that they take out into the field. And that's not something I see ever. It's just they disclose any condition that they have, anything of importance that they might need in case of emergency. put that card somewhere easily accessible. And in case of emergency does happen, only the doctor sees that card, but all the information is there, ready for them to hopefully feel a bit safer. And all that.
I agree 100% that like one of the best things that I found is that when you are upfront with some of your own background, people are more likely to be like, okay, this person shared with me, I feel safer sharing with them. So a lot, not even on field work, but in like the classroom classes I teach, I'll begin on that first day with, we'll go through parts of the syllabus, and then I'll be like, here's a couple of slides about who I am. I'm a first generation college student. I come from a school that was 90% of the schools, or 90% of the students lived at or below the federal poverty line. I came through, like, you know, I've done STEM programming, and I just a couple of different things about like my path into science. So many students assume that if you're a scientist in front of them, you had one path. Even if you are from a diverse background, a lot of that will go unseen because they have this idea of who a scientist is. And they'll assume that if they're not that, they don't want to talk to you because you won't understand. And maybe you won't understand everybody because you haven't had all those experiences. Just kind of putting yourself out there and showing what your background is, and then saying, everybody's different. If you have problems, you can talk to me about it. It just makes that a little bit more believable if you've already disclosed some of your own background, is what I've found. And then also reinforcing that. So it's not enough really to just say it on the first day. I also put it in the syllabus, but like I'll also do like refreshers before every test, or at different parts. Like you're always trying to reinforce that if something's going on, I welcome you to come talk to me. Because it's just, I remember when I was in college just thinking, if I go to the professor and say that I'm struggling, they're going to be like, you don't belong here. And it's just going to validate the fear I already had that I didn't belong there. So because I had that, I was like, I better not tell anyone when I'm struggling. So a lot of times the students that are struggling the most are not going to reach out. But if you've already established, hey, everybody struggles. I know you're all going to have different struggles. Come talk to me. It's not going to seem as scary. They're not going to be like, this person is going to judge me and that's it. So.
All right, do we have another one in the Q&A? I think so there was maybe one more.
Sure. Let me pick another one. We've got a lot. Well, something we haven't touched on that has been brought up is just remembering that there are other aspects of inclusion, for example, religious inclusion. So typically Christian holidays are well understood in academic institutions and people know how to work around those dates, but there's also religions where things like dietary restrictions are at play, especially when you're in the field during seasons when those things are happening. So any thoughts how we can be more inclusive in that regard?
Does anyone else want? I think we can be at the outset when we're making kind of those like discussions for like, I want to hear what's going on with you. We can also definitely like give examples that also include, or like when we're trying to outline, if you're having this kind of problem, come talk to me. I think there's a way to kind of include religion in that as well. I've had students come into the field who where I think we had a student who was Jewish Orthodox and she couldn't touch male students. So we always made sure that she was in the car, in the field cars, like sitting next to another girl. That was a very easy solution that she had a lot of concerns about at the outset, but just kind of having that conversation is like, that's fine. Making sure that if students come in and they have particular, like if they wear a hijab, that there are hijabs that you can get that are good for field work, better than some other like materials. I think that there's like, I think that religion is another thing that you can put kind of explicit examples or just say in your line of, if you're having any issues or concerns about these things, including religion, you can come talk to me. But does anyone have?
I mean, so at the field station, we feed people breakfast and provide what they need for lunch and then feed them dinner. We've never actually had to accommodate any like religious related food. needs, but we would. I mean, it's about having an open mind and making it work, you know. The one time where we couldn't accommodate was like a very, very severe gluten allergy, where we can't guarantee that our kitchen is completely gluten free. But we also have a cooking cabin in that sense. And then we set up part of that cabin that was exclusively for that student, which solved that problem. So I think being ready to be flexible and have conversations with the staff at a field station, for example, about food needs and making sure you ask those up front, because you wouldn't want to get into a situation where whatever's week order didn't include food for a student. So I think, yeah, that's not something I had to deal with yet, but we would be ready to deal with. That's a good point. And then I think, you know, there are some religious holidays that require fasting. And I've heard before that, you know, that wasn't part of the planning. And then the field work was overlapping with that, which is like the one thing you don't want to do when you're in the field is have a hungry set of people working with you for safety reasons and also just for attitude reasons. And so thinking about that early on and planning your field work, if you know that there are people on your team that will need that, is really, really important. Yeah.
Trying to take everyone's mic. This is about actually neurodivergence, which just listed, I just totally can't believe forgot this occurred. I once did have in one of your youth programs, we had a student who had autism that came on the trip, who had very particular dietary preferences. He only ate ramen with with lime and green Jello for dinner every day. And usually we went to a diner in town, and students would get to, especially like students who'd never been really outside of Chicago, we would have like a lot of different like Wyoming diner food and whatnot. But to accommodate that student, part of the discussion was like to have a very long discussion with their mother, because this was a minor as well, and just kind of like, what are their preferences? And then just make sure that you're making those little things. Like instead of having a student being like, well, you got to eat what's there. We brought packets of ramen. I called the diner. I made sure they were okay with us bringing in outside food. And every day of the week, he had exactly what he liked to eat. And then I think on the last day, he was like, I want to try some pancakes. He did not like them, but because we had created this environment where like we had made him comfortable and like was able to provide something that made him feel like basically comfortable, he was willing to step a little bit outside that comfort zone. I don't think I'll ever have pancakes again, but it wasn't really hard to bring those packets of ramen. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can think about how to accommodate. And this goes for other kind of food examples too. It's not always possible, but.
Here, I think we're hitting on really one of the true values of there being a diverse group of people who participate at all levels, because if you are somebody who has a particular need and your need is obvious to other people because you're the only one who's eating a certain thing or can't eat a certain thing or can't work on a certain day or has to wear a particular item of clothing, you know, you're going to stand out for that reason. But if you can sort of cultivate a sense that everybody has their thing and that's just your thing, and we're not all doing the same thing and we're just like accommodating you, that I think can be so exclusionary to people. And so if everyone is already there with their thing, you know, that is not necessarily a big ask, but is an ask, you know, then that means that everyone feels like their ask is not the one that people are going to be able to fixate on. And I think with the, you know, with the religious question, it's an important one because a lot of times these field programs are really packed itineraries and you can't always control what is and isn't going to happen on particular days. And if you schedule something out and then there's one or two people who can't participate because they need to have a religious observance, for example, that's going to be, you know, that's going to be really frustrating experience if they've invested in that. On the other hand, I think a lot of people who do require some level of accommodation, regardless if it's for religion or something else, they're already used to a sense that there might need to be a give and take, right? You know, I don't think anybody who needs an accommodation of some kind is going to demand it and in a forceful, demanding way and expect everybody to make the whole thing work around them. I think in general, they they know that they have needs. And what we need to do is make it feel comfortable for them to make them known, and then also make everyone who's in the group also aware that their needs can also be talked about freely, so that it's not just like this one person who feels like they're the only one, because everybody has got something that they need. They just don't necessarily say it. And then you end up with a situation where someone feels picked on or excluded. Another question.
So just to follow up on what you've been talking about, there's a question here that I'm going to summarize that essentially asks sort of from the opposite perspective. So you've all been students, you've done field work for the first time. If you're a student who's struggling in the field, whether with its concepts or equipment or anything that you're doing, what kind of recommendations do you have to help them ask for help or learn how to maximize their experience, even if they're struggling while they're out there?
Yeah, I'll just say I wish I had done more of this myself when I was in the field having some adverse experiences. I think, and again, like hopefully a trip leader has planted the seeds that you are someone with which this student could communicate. But I think it is okay to tell the person in charge. You can ask, hey, like, can I walk with you away with everyone else? Like, could we talk a little bit after dinner? I would encourage them to ask for a one-on-one conversation, and just try to share what's going on. And it's only like, it can be really hard. It can feel a little embarrassing. Like you kind of does take that little bit of confidence and courage. But you're not alone out there. Like that's the best part. And I think speaking to the person with the most authority, or like maybe if it's not the professor, maybe a grad student with whom you feel comfortable, if there's like a graduate student TA, to share some of your concerns so that they can be addressed. Because as you've heard, there's a lot of enthusiasm that we're sharing for addressing any type of concern a trainee may have. But yeah, we do need to know if there are issues arising.
Thinking back to when I was a student, I mean, it's hard to like think back and be like, okay, how do I, because you can't change what you did as a student. You can only change what you do now that you're faculty. I think if I had a wish for former me, it would have been that I wouldn't have had this like solid idea in my mind that I was going to be punished for showing weakness if I asked for help. Like this concept that like, if I don't keep up this like front, that I definitely belong here and you can't question it because I do, like, if I didn't think that there would be some sort of negative repercussion for asking for help, I think I would have been more likely to do it. And I think that's something that really only can be modified by making sure that on the other side of it as faculty, we're not giving out just this default image that like, this is how it is. And if you aren't meeting that, then you don't belong here. And I don't think it's something that a lot of us do like consciously. But I don't think the students alone basically is I think what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't think that there's really advice that we can give to students that doesn't also require faculty to be more inviting, because it's hard to be brave if we say, oh, you just got to be brave or ask for help, and they end up getting a faculty member that's like, well, then you should take a different class. Then that's going to be like, I knew it. It's going to reinforce that, like it's going to reinforce it. So I think that it's really the faculty that have to step up more than the students. Although I would tell students, be brave, like be braver than I was, because the squeaky wheel is the one a lot of times that is able to like, you can't get help if no one knows you need help.
Yeah, and I was just like kind of thinking on the spot right here. I know that a lot of like universities and things have a disability office that's mostly for like testing accommodations and stuff. But like, just for y'all, has anyone ever like tried to implement any accommodations like on that institutional level with the office for like field work or like all those types of projects? Like, if that's something that could be like implemented that a student can request without having to talk to like their immediate teacher, and now it's coming from a more official place, that could be something cool.
In my work with the DRO office, they usually, the office sends out, so this is just my experience at my institution, but the office usually bounces it back to us to then talk with the student about what their accommodations are. There are some accommodations that are like, you need to do this, and it's usually time for testing. But in terms of, there's a lot of other types of accommodations that the student is kind of left to advocate for themselves a little bit. So I think you're right about it. I think it depends on institution to institution, but I would be aware that I think it's good to familiarize yourself with the process of a DR. They call it different things, but we call it the DRO at your institution, and know if the student has to advocate for certain things in advance, because then if they do, I know that I've gotten emails sometimes that like, it's just a list of things that they could have, but it doesn't all like include everything. And then the student still has to ask for something. So it's really important for me that I reach out and have a conversation, because if you just take the top line, they're usually not getting the accommodations they need.
Yeah, because my disability office is definitely more direct. It's like, this student gets this accommodations, do it.
I think they only ever do that for time with anything else.
Yeah, I think thinking about my own experience, it does come down to like people in positions of power needing to be, I would say, I'm often described as aggressively curious, which sometimes is a positive thing and sometimes isn't. But, you know, if my advisor had asked more questions about what I needed in the field, that would have, I think I would have spoken to it. You know, if people are given the opportunity to raise what their needs are, they often will take that. And I mean, I even think down to my dad, who never even brought up the possibility that I could be gay with me ever. But I was a figure skater who loved My Little Ponies and all this other stuff. Like, he had so many opportunities just to be like, you know, Scott, that's okay if that's a thing. And so it took me a long time to come out because that didn't happen. You know, so if my dad had been more curious, and I love the guy, this isn't like a knock on him at all. You know, if adults are more curious about what students need, they will tell you. They won't wait until there's a crisis at all. But you just have to be ready and supportive to hear it. And so don't ask the question if you're not going to be supportive.
I sort of like lost the plot on the question, but as someone that has done field work for cultural anthropology, which like I am not a part of a team. I'm just by myself, just like doing field work. I think just like, I honestly don't remember what the question was now, but I think just like being like in community with the people that are like outside of my research site, since like I was like very immersed in like another person's world, just like getting back to my own or taking a break. Love to take a break, love to not think about work. Like, I think that's it's harder if you're like somewhere else remote, but if you are like someone that is your own, I'm my own PI. It's nice like to take a break and just like separate and find other things that are like enriching that are not like the work, because there is more to life than the work.
There's a question here in the audience. I think while we're getting to the question, I also in talking about this, I really think that this emphasis on trainees is where it needs to be. But on the other hand, I want to not lose sight of the fact that that PIs are people too, right? And we're frequently already performing 17 different roles. And sometimes we're not going to be able to do every one of them perfectly. And so if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're trying your best to manage, you know, the food situation and the stuff that's breaking situation and someone's abrupt change of travel plan situation, and all of this stuff is kind of happening at once, and then somebody's having a quiet mental health crisis and maybe a not so quiet mental health crisis, you might not always necessarily clue in on that. And it doesn't mean that you don't care. But I think what that speaks to is that, you know, like you were saying, Nala, field work is different for everybody and it's of a different scale. And maybe there's a need to be thinking about the scale of the operation and needs to support the PI so that they can better support their trainees also in a way that kind of distributes that, you know, that effort so that everybody feels, I mean, it doesn't have to be that the attention or the questions or the engagement is coming always directly from the one person, but just knowing there's somebody there who is designated to be able to deal with whatever might come up would, I think, promote a lot more confidence in general in the team and probably make those people who are running it better at it, doing that.
Yeah, can I speak to that really quickly? So I was recently at a NSF Innovations in Graduate Education PI meeting, which is really exciting and fun. And in one of the sessions, I brought up kind of what you're talking about, that we need frameworks for PIs to also take care of their own mental health, because when my mental health suffers, I'm not going to be as attentive to everyone else's. And particularly if you care, you're putting yourself in even more of a position to receive a lot of really important stuff from other people. But if you don't have a self-care framework, which we're never asked to plan in a grant proposal, what's going to happen, when you need a break? And one of the other PIs basically told me to shut up. And then later on came up to me and she's like, I'm sorry, I was so mad at you in that moment. But the reason is, as you said that, I realized like, that's why I didn't even want to come to this meeting, because she'd been so inattentive to her own mental health. In the context of trying to improve graduate education and trying to improve recruitment and community and stuff. So I think it is very, very important to remember that, yeah, anyone in a leadership perspective is also a human who needs some kind of framework to make sure that, as you know, they're doing all the stuff that Marie's, I don't even know how you are doing this first year assistant professor and then starting field inclusive. Like the framework for all of us to take care of ourselves is really important as well. And typically, like, we're also, most people that are really focused on improving things from an inclusion perspective are themselves minorities. And so it's a critically important piece that I think is almost always missing.
And then we have a question there that.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to say thank you all so much. This has been really awesome so far. I'm learning so much. I'm also really engaged in a lot of the discussion about preparation, which has been a lot of the discussion so far. And it's helping me think about these NSF field documents, which are really overwhelming to think about. But I'm also wondering about sort of action in the moment. And if any of you have had situations in the field where you had to really react in the moment to an unsafe situation or conflict between people on the team related to inclusivity, and how you manage that. This sort of touches back to the question about building trust and maybe rebuilding trust. So speaking about sort of thinking on your feet in addition to trying to be prepared for everything that can happen. This might have been an unfair question, sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what I'm being recorded. So there are certain, what was unsafe? I mean, yeah, in terms of taking students abroad, that's like where I have my largest group of people that are in a new situation that might be stressful. And there's invariably like interpersonal conflicts that you have to navigate. I co-teach this course, and the other instructor and I have like a framework for dealing with issues wherein, we will both talk to the student, but separately, and then kind of exchange notes to make sure that they're being, so we have the full picture, and then just try and structure the group to address it. From a physical safety perspective, I haven't thankfully had run into anything in the moment, but I think again, the pre-planning helps the in the moment stress, especially if you're co-instructing or co-leading a team, having like those upper level conversations about like, let's do a mental exercise of what happens if, either students just don't get along or there's a physical problem. But I guess I've been pretty lucky overall. It's been okay to manage the interpersonal stuff. But also, when I have those conversations with students, like I've been in groups before where it's challenging or where thankfully nothing is elevated to like a sexual harassment or any of those, where then we have like actual structures we have to follow. But yeah.
So I have not had a lot of situations where I've had to manage interpersonal stuff, because usually I feel like there was enough, like a lot of the, especially youth programs that I led, there was always 2 weeks in the classroom before we went out in the field, which was plenty of time to both establish rigorous expectations for how we were going to behave in the field, but also for the students to kind of like get to know each other and kind of gel a little bit. And if there were issues during that time, that was usually when they could be addressed more easily before we get out to a remote location. I will say in my experiences where we've had situations that occur from external factors, like we definitely had a situation where there was a time where we would take the Empire Builder train all the way to Montana. So we had 12 students and a couple of leaders that were all taking the train together. And that was one of the situations where we had another, like, it wasn't anyone associated with us, but it was a child who called one of our students the N-word and knocked his hat off his head and almost started an altercation. So it was one of those things where, like, so then in the moment, right, it's like, all right, we got to deal with this now. So how we dealt with that is the first thing is the student we had talked about previously, if this happens, what are we going to do? And he was with a couple of other students as well. And they all they didn't like engage in a fight. They all come back and talk to us, which was like, the first thing we wanted is like, if something happens, we are your champions. Come talk to us. We will resolve things. So the first step was making sure that they knew that right away, come get us. Don't keep this to yourself. Don't feel like you have to deal with it. We will deal with it. Come to us. Then the second phase wasn't phase, but the second part of that was then, how do you feel? How do you feel right now? And establishing like how they were feeling, what they needed emotionally in that moment. Like, is there anything that, like, this sounds really weird, but like, even like a piece of sugar. So like, how do you feel? Like, sit down, tell us about it. And then third, what do you want us to do about this? Like, how do you want us to handle, what would you like to see happen? The result of that, for everyone that's curious, we actually went into the train conductor and we told them what had happened. And then one of the girls that had been with that student so that they didn't have to see the person again, went with the train conductor, found the student, pointed it out to the train conductor. The conductor was like, you have to sit in your seat for the rest of this trip. You cannot get up at all. You cannot talk to anyone. That's it. So that was the solution so like now there was no like, he was not going to have to interact with that person again, see them anywhere. And then we were able to have a discussion about, like, we had a group discussion after that about a lot of different things, but in the moment being central, like kind of putting central, like removing someone from the situation that is dangerous, and then checking in with them about how they feel and how they want you to respond before you just respond it's really important to just like centralize them and their feelings and their experience in what your future solution will be. And also just be calm. It's going to sound hard in the moment, but if something like that happens, you cannot lose your shit. Like, you have to, like, no matter what you're feeling, just like be the responsible, calm, we're going to get this done. And then later, when the program is over, you can rant to your friends over a beer. But in the moment, hold it in, because it's not about your feelings. It's about their feelings.
Yeah, Bill, that was a fantastic answer. And yeah, so unfortunately, I would say I was the like victim of some comments. Again, remember, I'm in these situations where there's 3 of us in the field. This one summer in Australia for 7 weeks. It was me and my classmate in my same lab group and our undergraduate field assistant, who turned out not to be the best pick. There was a question about building trust beforehand. We just like, okay, we're kind of late in picking one. So we're like, okay, here's this guy. I always go in with the best opinion of anyone. It really takes a lot to like grade that down, but just the things he said over the course of the summer were like personally offensive to me and women generally, and people of like different, just any sort of aspect of identity. Like, he would be casually saying things that were like pretty offensive. I would try to say like, that's, no, that's like not really how the world works. But like, there were just some things that were so jaw-dropping. I will not repeat them here. And I just kept waiting for my classmate to maybe, who was a guy also, 2 guys, to maybe just say like, like, that's pretty inappropriate, but it just like never happened. And I was just getting increasingly upset, trying not to be angry, but I was just getting so upset as these 7 weeks went on. Even when my advisor kind of did his fly in, fly out, he was like, oh, you're not really being very nice to the student. I was like, yeah, I guess I could be doing better. And then finally, on the last day, we're about to fly home. I had gone to church for the first time in 7 weeks, and the student said something very offensive about my religion. And finally I said to him, I was like, you know what? you've said many things over the course of the summer that were personally offensive to me, both my gender and now my religion. And like, I think you really need to like rethink your behavior like going forward. And so it's really interesting to me when I got back to campus that fall that people who were not there in the moment were saying to me like, wow, I heard you really like, like bitch that guy out. And I was like, oh, really? Like, did you hear the things he said along the way? And it was just like shocking to me that like, and like one of my advisors laughed at me when I said like, I just like really had a problem with this student. The other was like, oh, like, what do you want me to do? And I don't actually think like did anything. And so it just like really made me like, this was as you can tell, like this is a formative experience in like my feeling that like, wow, we really need to do something different, and that these interpersonal conflicts do happen. I wish in that moment I had, I was in my early 20s. I had not been empowered with a lot of the reading and workshops and thinking I've done since then. I think a concrete suggestion to anyone here is that our university through the Title IX office does a bystander intervention training that we've had come through our department multiple times every couple of years. And it's like a really good refresher and empowering, and we'll like break into small groups and practice saying like, tell me more what you mean by that. Or like, I think that may have been offensive. And so even in like the context of doing it in this workshop, I think even if I had experienced that, like, earlier on in my training, I think it would have been more empowered to speak up on my behalf. And I think it's a different circumstance when it's like, wow, you're the victim, but you're the leader, versus I think if it had been a friend, I would have been like all up in their business and being like, no, you don't talk to my friend like that. So I think also looping back into how we take into account our own mental health as PIs and trip leaders, I think there are just some overlapping themes there.
I think you made a really important statement, which is that this is a formative moment in your career, right? And so I think that these sorts of experiences, if they're positive or if they're negative, they could really affect if you're going to really go down the fieldwork career path or not. And so it can have a huge impact on lots of decisions that you'll make, even a small thing. And the sense, especially for these extended field projects where you're experiencing microaggressions on a constant basis and you're kind of trapped in this small bubble of people, can really be a uniquely horrifying experience to have that I think isn't necessarily the case in disciplines that aren't field heavy, right? Because you can at least leave the lab, leave the classroom. It's not ideal and should be dealt with, but in the field, you really are. This becomes your social group for a time. I think this is changing a little bit with social just access, much improved access to, say, the internet and phones. I mean, when I was starting my field career, I got one phone call a month, and that was what I had, 5 minutes, right? So obviously different now, and you can at least get outside support, but with that comes extra complications also. But I think just bearing in mind how influential and formative these experiences are and how crucial it is to get it right is a really important point to remember. And I think that you had a question before. Yeah.
Thank you. And this has nothing to do with these amazing stories that you've just shared with us. So thank you for sharing those. I kind of want to go back to the very beginning in thinking. I'm a geoscientist and thinking about, bringing more people into the discipline. And I teach at an undergraduate institution. And so a lot of our discussion today has been about those students who've already kind of selected into taking your class or maybe majoring in geoscience or your field, how to make them comfortable in staying in the field. But I'm thinking about the students that might not necessarily select in because they may not see themselves as outdoorsy or whatever reason. Maybe they think geoscience is all about being in the field, when in actuality, I go out in the field, but I actually spend most of my time in the laboratory. So.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And I think when we're thinking about representation in terms of like, I don't know if your department has like a rotating slideshow and like the front entry hall or posters around department members, what are you showing? I think it's a fantastic point and something that is really important to mention is that not every geoscientist does field work, and that's okay. You don't have to do field work to be a geoscientist. In fact, I think a really important thing that I tell students, thinking about majoring geology is well, if you want to solve the climate crisis, you should really be a geoscientist. We're doing a lot of the hard science that's really figuring out the scope of that. And I think in terms of visual representation, showing people in a lab, at a computer, so much amazing work is done. Yeah, staring at our laptops, sadly, which is a little less glamorous. But that's an incredibly important contribution. And now, yes, the vast majority of my year I now spend in a lab and not in the field. And the field is the shiny highlight in the middle. But then, and it gives me the motivation to keep going all year long in the lab working with those samples. So I think highlighting to your students this is a part of geosciences, but not the only part. And you are no less of a great scientist if you decide, this isn't for you. So.
Okay, we have 3 minutes until we're going to have coffee, a much needed and a bio break. So we do that, but are there any final kind of thoughts or questions about this that anybody wants to bring up before we have our kind of keynote discussant come in about a half an hour? And she will be on virtually, so we'll have a big head speaking to us from up here. One more? Also, thank you for everybody for your questions and for participating. Are there any more in the Q&A that we should keep aside that have come up? Just have a quick look. And the final question?
Hi, thank you for this great panel. I was just wondering, sort of, as someone who's kind of thinking, who's in nowhere near part of being a faculty position, but trying to think of advocacy and change in a departmental and institutional level, how you kind of change the culture without setting the policies or making the decisions. How do you get faculty or other labs to buy into these things when it maybe isn't a priority to them or something that they're thinking of, without as someone in this sort of getting burnt out, trying to get people to care about this thing if you care about it. Yeah.
Can I follow up on this question? I've been wondering the same thing. And I think ever since, Jennifer, you mentioned your code of conduct and you talked about tracking patterns of behavior and enforcing a code of conduct with consequences. I've tried so hard at past universities to, you can make as many workshops on microaggressions or behavior towards women or international students that faculty don't take because they're tenured and they're not required to. What are those consequences? What can you do when you don't have tenure? We're all here because we want to make an inclusive, safe space for people in the field, but a lot of people aren't and they don't care and they're intractable. So what do you do?
Yeah, and that's a really tough thing because even doing my own personal work and with Field Inclusive, is always that self-selecting group who's already interested in the topic coming to learn more about it, like all of you guys are. And so I've kind of encountered, I guess, kind of 3 groups of people in dealing with this. So one, the self-selecting ones who are into it and are already trying to advocate for it, maybe just need the resources, and really kind of trying to get those people on board with specific projects or specific directions, goals that they can actually achieve. That's the easy part. The second kind of group needs a little bit more convincing, and that's where you try to show them scientific papers about how DEI actually benefits some of these natural sciences, and showing them again some programs that have been effective, and look at all these students or all these people who are now participating who didn't beforehand, and trying to kind of statistics them into doing stuff that works. And then you have the third group who sometimes you just gotta wait for people to retire. I mean, that's not a great answer, and unfortunate, but some people are just going to be stuck in their ways and there's really nothing you can really do about it. Encourage them to buy their boats, go to their summer homes, just retirement sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think also having a critical mass of people can be helpful through organizing. I'm thinking in particular for archaeology, there's the Society of Black Archaeologists, because there's not a critical, there's I mean, I could probably count on like both hands all of the Black women in archaeology, which is abysmal. But I think that people became aware that that was an issue, and there's like issues of racism, obviously, and then organized a group. So now they have the SBA and the AAAs, which is the American Anthropological Association, and the Society for Historical Archaeology, also like are very much interlinked. During 2020, when there was the racial crisis around George Floyd, they leveraged that group very heavily to like give talks about racism and archaeology. I know it's also the Society for Disabled Archaeologists. Like there are always people organizing about these issues. Like there's not only one person cares about these things that are happening. So I think like leveraging like the power of the people to like make changes. Again, the people that don't care probably just aren't going to care, and just like accepting that. Sit with that anger, but like there are people that do care that are going to care, but you can't really change the minds of people that will never care.
I also think that like, so right now, a lot of the geosciences hemorrhage diversity at the earlier stages, right? Because we have undergraduates that even if we have a diverse undergraduate population, they don't make it into graduate, they don't then continue on to graduate school because of all the obstacles they face. So as much as we want representation at the highest levels that are going to be the people that are then going to help institute the policy, if we can't get people beyond undergraduate, then we're not going to get like representation at the top. Like we're not going to be able to change the top, especially if they're set in their ways. And we're not going to be able to bring in new people unless we're making sure we stop hemorrhaging the diversity at the earliest stages. So as much as it is important to continue to kind of press on the administrators to make changes, I think it's also like equally, if not more important, to also focus on just keeping the diversity that's already present, that we just keep losing year after year after year. And the reality of that is it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for the changes that we want to see to happen. I think that there's also some of one of the reasons it hasn't changed yet is because a lot of people kind of look at it as like, oh, that's going to take forever, and then don't do it because it's going to take forever. So I think that it's important to recognize that the journey is going to be long, but we need to start it now. Like we need to do what we can now for the students we already have and undergraduates that are going to disappear if they don't get the support they need.
Well, I think that I actually want to add on to this from the perspective that got me into this in the first place, which is as a parent and specifically as a mother, because I think that, you know, the baby tax that we all know about that happens in all, you know, corporate and everywhere, it really, I think, intersects with field work in a way that means that some people who might, you know, continue in their careers might lay off on the field work later on. You know, and as the kind of dependent care obligations, aging parents, children, and so on, you know, you find yourself less and less able to manage the field part of it, I think, potentially. And then what happens is it's like, where's that next generation of people who know field work and specifically that component of all of the different disciplines that we represent here? And how can we kind of build in more of a plan for continuity across people who have the field heavy programs to either pass on that information effectively to people coming up or to just keep doing it and lower the barriers to doing it? So that's my particular soapbox. But we are a little bit over time, but I think that Jen, you've got one comment and then we can go have some coffee.
Yeah, I think Scott.
You both have
quick
okay.
comments. Yeah, I did actually want to answer your question in that how did we get this promoted? I was a postdoc when I was suggesting these policies. Our department has a still active diversity, equity, inclusion committee that has a few professors, a few postdocs, a few grads, maybe an undergrad or two. Yeah, even undergrads on it. And that committee still is like take suggestions. When I was coming up with these policies, I was a member of that committee. And then I am aware that the structure at faculty meeting is that at every faculty meeting in our department, an update from the IDEA committee is welcome. And then in the case on which, like for this fieldwork code of conduct, the faculty actually saw the code. Some of them actually provided feedback and suggestions, and then they voted to approve it. So for us, that was the mechanism of making sure that policies got before faculty, approved by the faculty, and importantly, the faculty are the ones who are going to be around long-term, not a postdoc like me. And so, yeah, that was physically how we did it.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Nala that you can't change hearts and minds, so don't waste your time doing it. But you can organize and find those like-minded people. Kind of the grassroots approach is what has really worked well in our department, and it's moved all the way up to the top of the department, which is still just one part of the university. But then once you have power, which I don't feel like I actually really do, but I kind of do, because I can either approve or deny your research permit at my field station. And so as part of Niwot Ridge's annual training, in order to work on Niwot Ridge, you have to attend a training event that's mostly focused on field safety, but we talk about community inclusion and all of these things. And if you don't go to that training, your permits don't get approved. So that's not true for all of the permits at the station yet, but by next year it will be. And so, in that case, like even if you're just sitting there listening to me passively, maybe one or two things will make it through, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I'll hopefully see you back here. Thank you so much. We are going to go ahead and have Professor Mike Crair introduce you, and then we can go ahead. So he's going to come up, and I don't know what you can see from your side at the podium, but we're here.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. McNutt. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Crair. I'm a professor in the Department of Neuroscience and the Vice Provost for Research. It's my honor and privilege to make a few brief remarks and to introduce Dr. McNutt. So what we've heard this afternoon, a really interesting discussion, is about how the institution plays an important role in ensuring that scientific research is conducted in a productive, safe, and inclusive environment. And by the institution, I mean everybody. That means students, faculty, staff, and administration. All of us play an important role in that process. Fieldwork is performed. We also heard fieldwork is performed across multiple disciplines with common rewards and challenges. And there are often, these challenges are often unique to fieldwork rather than unique to a particular discipline. And fieldwork is quite different in many ways than other kinds of scientific research that's being done at a university, although there are many common challenges as well. Inclusive practices create pathways towards more productive scientific research by bringing diverse talents, perspectives, and experiences to bear on common problems. However, the challenges of fieldwork, which we've already heard about, travel and logistical planning, may intersect with personal circumstances and the strengths of scientists in ways that make it more difficult to develop and maintain inclusivity. There are many efforts here at Yale and elsewhere to develop more inclusive fieldwork practices, but these can be done often in isolation, which is obviously difficult and inefficient and counterproductive. So good communication and sharing of best practices is essential in order for us all to adopt more inclusive approaches to fieldwork and scientific research in general. The aim of this workshop, as I heard this afternoon, and I'm sure Dr. McNutt is going to touch upon in her comments, is to encourage cross-disciplinary conversations that maximize inclusive work, fieldwork. Ideal products could be from our discussions, articulation of the specific challenges that we face with fieldwork, and how they affect the ability of individual scientists to participate in fieldwork in an inclusive way, a set of clear recommendations for how to mitigate these challenges, and identification of steps towards generating a centralized set of resources for people who engage in scientific fieldwork or who are considering doing so in an inclusive environment. So I've learned a lot already this afternoon, and I'm sure, I hope that you've learned and will continue to learn about how we can encourage inclusive environment in scientific research in general, but fieldwork in specifically. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. McNutt. Probably she doesn't need any introduction, but I'll do so anyway as a courtesy to Marcia. So she's a geophysicist who received her BA in physics from Colorado College and her PhD in earth sciences from Scripps Institute of Oceanography in Southern California. She was a professor for many years at MIT, where she directed the joint program in oceanography, applied ocean sciences, and engineering. She's had many very important professional roles, including she was the director of the U.S. Geological Survey. She was editor-in-chief of Science for the Scientific Family of magazines. And she is currently the 22nd president of the United States, the National Academy of Sciences. She's been recognized with numerous awards and honorifics. I'm not going to list them. There are many, many, many of them, but just a few of them. She's a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and she's a foreign member of the Royal Society of the United Kingdom. So Dr. McNutt, I'm so delighted to welcome you here to our workshop on inclusivity in scientific research. And I'm sure you've been a pillar of understanding and disseminating best practices. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Are you all seeing my slides or are you seeing it in presenter mode?
Looks like we can see your presenter mode.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is good. We're just
Great.
making it not be tiny on the screen, but it is certainly in the correct format. So thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this group today. I was very interested in this morning's conversation because I'll tell you this afternoon's conversation, the biggest concern I had in speaking to this group was that so much of my experience in the field would be dated because I've been in, other roles for a number of years now that haven't actually allowed me to spend much time in the field. So I was perhaps concerned that some of the issues I might address today had already been solved. But sadly, I find out that many of these issues still exist. So perhaps this is not as dated as I was concerned about in the beginning. But I thought I'd focus on the ocean sciences with a brief history and some perspectives from my time going to sea as an ocean scientist. Now, what is the problem in ocean sciences? Well, first of all, women and racial minorities are underrepresented in science overall. And frequently cited reasons for this underrepresentation is discrimination, implicit bias, microaggression, chilly climate, lack of role models and mentors. Now, this overall situation is actually much worse in the ocean sciences than it is in many other sciences in terms of minorities, because less than 2% of students and less than 1% of faculty are minorities in the ocean sciences. On the other hand, the growth of women in ocean sciences has been quite startling. In the present day, it's nearly 1/3 of marine science faculty are already female. And in terms of students, at many of the top oceanographic institutions, more than 50% are now women. So we've seen a startling turnaround in the representation of women in the ocean sciences. And I'm hoping that some of the lessons we learned in the case of increasing representation of women might also be instructive for how we can increase representation of underrepresented minorities. Now, some of the barriers for women at sea were actually not something that other underrepresented groups have encountered. For example, in ancient times, going all the way back to Homer's Odyssey, it was considered actually bad luck to have women on ships. And this ban of women on ships continued even to more modern times in the 1800s and the early 1900s, with the exception of course, all the women who were brought over on slave ships. No one considered them bad luck, or paying passengers on ships like the Titanic. Women were fine as long as they were slaves or paying, but women were otherwise had to disguise themselves as men, for example, to go on early oceanographic expeditions. Even as early as, or as recent as the mid-1960s, women were not allowed on oceanographic research ships in the US. And the commonly cited reason why was that there were no appropriate facilities on these ships for women. And what such facilities might be were never laid out. There were occasional exceptions. Women could go out on day trips out of the major oceanographic institutions such as Woods Hole or Scripps, or if you were a wife of a scientist. Now, Imagine if you're a young woman in the late 60s, early 70s, wanting to be an oceanographer, and your only role models found that they had to marry a man who was an oceanographer and had access to sea if you wanted to ply your trade and actually become an oceanographer. This taboo was finally broken at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and not for a reason that, you know, people becoming more enlightened. What actually happened was, this was at the height of the Cold War, and 2 Soviet scientists were invited out on a Scripps ship because it was felt that this would be a good gesture to retain scientific connections with Russia in spite of the Cold War. Well, it turns out that one of the women who showed up was, or one of the 2 scientists from the Soviet Union who showed up was a woman. Her name was Elena Lubinova, and it was too late to back down. So Scripps had to allow women to go out to sea. And that broke the stranglehold. So, but even in those days when women were finally allowed at sea, there were challenges for women. And I just list a few of them. First of all, it's an isolated environment. Once you're out at sea, it's not like you can hike your way out or go decide to, you know, if you're in at from your field camp at a town, decide you're going to take a bus home. You're stuck out there for the duration. There's no place to go. There's no way to get off. There's no way to disentangle yourself from a difficult situation. There's also this unreal aspect of it. And I think it was maybe Jennifer on the panel this morning who said, what happens in the field stays in the field. Well, I sort of felt that out on these ships, there was this attitude of what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, where people felt it was an unreal environment and the normal rules for social interaction and polite respect of your colleagues that would happen in the office just didn't count once you were in the field. Of course, women were vastly outnumbered, and there were unique cultures and customs that were prevalent, like the equator crossing ceremonies or the dateline crossing ceremonies, which were generated by men, for men, you know, such as, you know, cutting people's hair off and stuff like that. The next problem is a totally muddled jurisdiction for lodging complaints, which was truly evident on ships, but I'm sure in other field situations. If something goes wrong, who can you complain to? Is it your PI, the chief scientist on the expedition? Is it the captain? Is it someone back on shore? You didn't know who to complain to, and especially if your complaint was about the chief scientist, you were pretty much with no recourse while you were at sea. There was also the concern that complaining might jeopardize your future funding. If you were found to be someone who complains a lot, well, you're hard to get along with, and maybe you just shouldn't be at sea. Or, as I think it was Laura who mentioned earlier today on the panel, being viewed as a victim could impact your future career prospects. You know, maybe you don't belong there if you're a victim. Maybe you aren't tough enough. Maybe you don't know how to handle stressful situations. And so there was this almost taboo against complaining because of concerns for how it would impact you. So my early experiences were pretty unusual. For example, the first time I went to sea was an expedition that was completely out of the ordinary because there were many female graduate students on that expedition. I think there were maybe 4 of us, Karen Wishner, Cindy Lee in chemistry, Kathy Crane from geology, Lisa Levin from biology, and me from geophysics, an unusually large number of women. Even the marine tech was a woman on that expedition. And what was also unusual about that expedition was it was led by graduate students. This was in the early days of plate tectonics, when most of the important work was being done by students who weren't wedded to the old ideas. And so having the leaders of the expedition also be graduate students diffused a lot of the hierarchical relationships that you often find in the field. However, that was a one-time experience. My later expeditions that I went on as a woman, I was usually the only woman on board the ship. And that led to challenges of its own. For example, the only way they could accommodate me on the ship was to give me the only cabin other than the captain's cabin and the chief scientist's cabin that was for a single. And that was the doctor's cabin, which was, they no longer had doctors on the ship, but the cabin was still available. And it was in the tippy bow of the ship below decks. So it was the worst ride on the ship. You had to have a really strong stomach to be able to survive in that cabin because it rocked and rolled like no other. But I think one thing that was important for my early expeditions was that my first summer as a student at Scripps, I had, my advisor had sent me out to train with the Navy SEALs in underwater demolition. So I spent the summer out on San Clemente Island, learning how to assemble charges, blow them up, Bangalore torpedoes, everything. And when I came back from that training, I actually graduated top in the Navy SEAL team class. And I had such a reputation that no one messed with me after that, because they knew that I had skills that could perhaps make them disappear and never be seen again. So I was someone you didn't want to struggle with. That was the case until my first expedition after I had graduated. And it was in 1983. At that time, I was an assistant professor at, yes, I was an assistant professor at MIT. And I went on a ship called, went on the RV Melville on something called the Ngindi expedition. It was named for the tiki god, the earth balancer. And the purpose of the cruise was to conduct a seismic experiment at the Tonga Trench to test noise levels in a subsea seismometer that was deployed into a hole that was drilled by the Glomar Challenger as part of the ocean drilling program. This expedition was funded by DARPA because they were very interested in understanding whether installing seismometers below the seafloor would create extra fidelity for the seismic network that was making sure that other nations conformed to the nuclear test ban treaty. One of the contractors on that expedition, who was from a private company that was part of DARPA's experiment, showed up in my cabin late one night, and he was very drunk, and he tried to crawl into my bunk. He was under the impression that somehow I was attracted to him. I had to threaten to turn him into the chief scientist and the captain if he didn't leave immediately. Fortunately, he was not so drunk that he didn't understand how that might jeopardize his future career, and he left. But that whole experience led me to think that part of this mentality at sea, the things that you would normally not do on dry land were acceptable, was the result of alcohol on board ships. Now, many years after that, it was decades later, that the University National Oceanographic Laboratory System, or UNOLS, which was the organization which guided the policies on all of the ships and set their schedules, banned alcohol on ships on the UNO's fleet, the research fleet, entirely. And it had nothing to do with sexual harassment of women, but it was implemented as a safety standard after an inebriated crew member fell overboard late at night because he, wasn't in control of himself and he was lost at sea. But I wondered, would that have a secondary benefit of reducing the incident of sexual harassment on vessels as well? And I thought that maybe it would be important. And then I read this. It was a Washington Post article that was told in 2015 by a young woman named Julia O'Hearn. And she stated, as a graduate student, she was elated when senior scientists invited her to conduct research aboard the same scientific research vessel that had been christened earlier by Sylvia Earle. She was a female pioneer in marine biology. And as Julia states, she loved the job and put up with a colleague's increasingly crude comments about her body. But then he came into her room one night, and when she complained, her results were the opposite of mine. Her shifts were cut. They altered her duties. She was barred from attending dive school and harassed further. So it was apparent that just banning alcohol was not enough to make for an equal environment for women. I think there's been progress since her time. This was a report which many of you might be familiar with on sexual harassment of women. It came out from the academies, and I think about 2016. So it was a year after Julia's story. And one of the most famous icons that came out of this report was this iceberg model, where the iceberg was sort of the emoji for thinking about the public consciousness of what is harassment being the part of the iceberg that's above the sea level, whereas below sea level is the much larger part of it. And it's the part that actually was contributing at that time to difficulties for women in science. It wasn't any longer overt sexual assault or rape or quid pro quo types of threats, but it was rather comments that were rude and unwanted, sabotaging women's equipment, obscene gestures, sexist insults, like things like, oh, do you really think you want to go to sea? Wouldn't you be better off just analyzing data that other people collect? Little put downs like that. And as one contributing committee member wrote about this, harassment is not about romance gone awry. It's about trying to pull women into or about trying to pull women into sexual relationships. It's instead about pushing women out, about pushing them out of careers where they're seen not to fit and not to belong. So we talk about this in terms of gender harassment. It's that submerged part of the iceberg which has gone underground so people don't realize that it's a form of sexual harassment, but it's there. It might be tempting to assume there's a continuity of severity with these various acts of abuse, that verbal sexual overtures are not as bad as physical ones, or that worst offenses are those that turn sexual, but that's not the case. The committee that wrote this report reviewed the evidence and found that none of those assumptions hold to scientific scrutiny, that basically all are equally bad. So the report also talks about what does work. First of all, creating inclusive, respectful environments. We heard a lot from the panel this morning about what can be done to make sure that our environments are more inclusive. how you have to diffuse hierarchical environments. I talked about that first expedition I went on that was led by graduate students. There was so little hierarchy that we all had felt that we were part of the solution and belonged. But you can also diffuse hierarchical environments through mentoring, through flexible funding, so that students don't feel like, oh, if I stand up to my supervisor who's not giving me the credibility that he is the other students, that my funding will go away and my career will be gone. And the focus is actually on changing behavior, not beliefs. You really have to address the actions that people take rather than trying to understand what's motivating them. We have to support targets. We heard a lot earlier today about supporting the targets of this abuse, to offer them confidentiality, and especially to prevent retaliation. Next, to have clear policies and transparent procedures so that everyone knows who they go to, what their rights are, and what's going to be done to protect them. And finally, making everyone responsible. Leaders, of course, but rest of the community as well. This is why we put so much focus on bystander training, so that everyone knows that you can stand up even when it's not you that's being harassed or that's being treated as second class. You have to stand up for everyone. And finally, just in closing, I think that for too many decades, the environment has been designed to select for the toughest and most determined underrepresented scientists, and not necessarily the best and brightest. And that's not what we want. We want to actually have the best and brightest. So let me stop sharing now and turn this over for any questions that people might have.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Do we have any questions here from the audience? Or comments or thoughts about that? I could start us off if you want to ruminate for a bit. I'm thinking about what you say about all of the recommendations that you have, and all of it, I think, is clear to us that they're necessary. But there's this question of who and how, sort of who's responsible for implementing and who's responsible for actually making sure that they get implemented, and at what level, and kind of who's going to bear the consequences if they don't. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about where it should start.
Yeah, so first of all, I think in the end, everyone has to be responsible. But I think we also have to create really clear guidance to people who have been targets of harassment, of who they can go to and who is responsible for actually dealing with their situation. And let me tell you, this isn't isolated with younger scientists or with people who are not in positions of power. I was in a meeting that involved members of the councils from the 3 national academies. So these are all highly respected scientists, well, their careers are well established. They have a lot of power, a lot of seniority. And in one of these meetings, one of the men from one of the councils said to one of the women, after she said something, and she said, "Oh, wait, what I really meant was this." And the one of the men around the table said to her, "Oh, we'll forgive you your blonde moment." Well, that was absolutely inappropriate, unnecessary. And we actually called him on it. Everyone in the room called him on it. And in the end, he was dismissed from being on that particular council committee because we felt we had to stand up for the fact that he was, his excuse was, "Oh, I'm old and brought up in it during another generation." Oh, no, you weren't. You know better than that. Everyone knows better than that now. So it is everyone's responsibility. And even when you get to be seniors, these issues can still arise.
You brought up this issue of bystander training, and I know that that came up in the panel as well. And I've also found that to be incredibly useful, in part because of what some of the panelists were saying about there being actual scenarios that are played out. You know, it's all well and good to be online and to go through trainings, but to actually have to talk about and enact and confront specific scenarios, I think is a really useful kind of exercise. But a lot of the recommendations do come with a sort of an extra paperwork burden and extra paperwork costs and extra time. And, you know, there's this already a tension between the amount of administrative work that needs to happen to do the fundamentals of what we do. And then on top of that, there's a lot of trainings already. So, you know, what do you think about how to best strike that balance between what is mandatory and how to actually ensure that the mandatory trainings are done? You know, I feel that there's a risk here that you get people who are undergoing the motions but aren't necessarily that committed because, you know, they're required to do it. And then I'm not sure how that translates.
Yeah, so unfortunately, what I've seen that the science says that a lot of these online trainings actually backfire. They're not only ineffective, but they actually create almost the opposite of what they're trying to do. I'll tell you, the best training I ever attended was I was visiting UMass Amherst, and the students put on a training about harassment and relationships between advisors and students. And what was so impactful about this training was they had the students role play the advisors, and they had the advisors role play the students. And what was so fabulous about this is when you put the faculty in the place of having to understand it from the student standpoint, and the students in the place of understanding it from the advisor's standpoint, because none of these situations are black and white. There's always all these shades of gray. And as the role playing would advance, they'd stop it every now and then and allow everyone else in the room to sort of comment on how they see this playing out. And what you realize is that there are early opportunities to diffuse situations which need to be seized. And sometimes until you actually see them on the ground like this, you don't realize what those early opportunities are. So I'm a big advocate for role playing these situations and helping to diffuse them at very early stages.
Yeah, are there any other questions or comments that we have? In particular, maybe if I could put our panelists on the spot. I see some of them are busily taking notes. Okay, great. Jennifer's got one if the mic is coming. Mic is coming.
Yeah, Dr. McNutt, this is Jennifer Casbom. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation you shared with us, and also to share that the National Academy's report, which I saw for the first time in 2018, was instrumental in my own path to advocacy and helping me feel that I wasn't the only one. It gave me a 300-page document I actually brought to my advisor, and I said, you know what, I shouldn't be able to highlight you know, scenarios and situations, but I've highlighted a lot of this book. So yeah, so I just wanted to offer my thanks for the work the academies did to put that report together. And I am curious if the academies have been tracking responses to that report in the literature or even anecdotal experiences, or if you have anything to share from the intervening 6 years since that came out.
So thanks for that, Jennifer. So as a result of that report, we set up something called an action collaborative. And an action collaborative is a collaboration of the willing. And it started out just inviting presidents, provosts, you know, leadership people from scientific institutions around the country to join the collaborative and work together on the nitty-gritty of, but how do I actually apply the recommendations from this in my own setting. The Action Collaborative got so much interest and so many institutions wanting to join that we had to basically expand it to be a number of action collaboratives, one for like research universities, one for private laboratories, another for medical institutions. I mean, believe me, medical institutions have their whole nother realm of problems and higher stakes than some of the other institutions. So we now have a number of action collaboratives that were spawned as a result of this. Each of those action collaboratives has put out series of best practices based on the institutions that are part of the action collaborative, trying out different things and experimenting, improving, and finding what works in their setting. So I urge you to go to the website for the Action Collaboratives for Sexual Harassment and take a look at all the documents they put out on best practices, because I think that this has been a way to amplify the message from the report and actually put it into action on the ground in the appropriate institutions.
Thank you so much.
Another question over here.
Thank you, Dr. McNutt. This is Suzanne O'Connell, and we have traveled some roads together. And one road we haven't traveled, and I certainly appreciated your discussion of the history of women in oceanography. But one of the things I see as I look around this room and I look in my own department is that we're still dominantly white. And I don't know how we're going to change the racial complexion of earth science or fieldwork in general, but certainly earth science. And I wonder if you could comment on that at all, because I see that as, in terms of getting the best and brightest, we're missing a big part of the best and brightest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one program that I was really keen on, and to tell you the truth, since I'm no longer running my own field programs, I don't know if it's still going on, was the National Science Foundation had this program called Research Experience for Undergraduates, REUs. And on several of my oceanographic expeditions, I was able to take undergraduate students from small liberal arts colleges, historically minority institutions, out to sea when they were like sophomores and juniors. And these were students who had taken some science classes, but and usually were already thinking about majoring in science. But it gave them an actual experience to see what on the ground does an oceanographer, what's their life like? What's all about it? And I had so much fun with these undergraduates at sea. Some of them were minorities. And I'm happy to say that of the minorities who came out on these expeditions, they're all now scientists, actually, in some field of science. Sometimes not oceanography, because sometimes they found out the hard way that they get really seasick. But nevertheless, they found their niche in science. So I think we have to find ways to involve these students when they're younger and earlier. And I think from the panel earlier today, we also heard some good examples of bringing young people out into the field. I think some of the struggles for land-based field, where, you know, we heard all the issues of taking young African-American students to Wyoming. At least on a ship, you don't have that problem. You're your own environment and you can pretty much control it. And I'll have to say, there have been African-American crew members on these ships since the beginning. So it's not like they are, you know, unique or unusual to have African-Americans on board a ship. So I really like these programs that give experiences to undergraduates so they can actually see what it's like and feel like they belong.
Thank you. I think Elena, you had your hand up before, or was, okay, we have a Q&A.
Yeah, we have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
you can.
Okay. We have a question from the chat. The get through it aspects of fieldwork have been brought up many times today. I am curious about what you think about how we should balance preparing new students and trainees for the physical and mental rigors of fieldwork with this attitude, which might make things harder than they need to be, discourage reasonable accommodations, or glamorize unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there's so much to unpack in that question. For example, I remember back in I think it was the early 2000s, UNOS, this group that runs the Oceanographic Research Ship, put together a committee to take a look at how to make oceanographic research ships more accessible to people who are handicapped. And it was a fascinating exercise because, first of all, we determined that there were a lot of dangers on board a ship that probably could not be easily mitigated, even in the design. And this was prior to designing a new class of oceanographic research ships. Even understanding that these ships were going to be redesigned from the get-go, there were a lot of dangers that it was really difficult to mitigate. For example, how to control a wheelchair on a rolling deck and how to move around safely in a wheelchair was something that was going to be really, really difficult. But we did discover that there were a number of other types of handicaps that if we built the ship in a way that made it more accessible for those people, it actually made the ship far more accessible even for people without handicaps. I mean, I know that many of you have probably been out on streets and you really appreciate that curbs now have sloping ramps for wheelchairs, which are also great if you're on a bicycle or if you have a baby stroller. You know, even if you're not handicapped, so many of these things make a lot of sense. So I think, first of all, for every field setting, we should investigate what are the limits of how we can make it more accessible, understanding that anything we do to make it more accessible is going to benefit just about everyone. So I think that's an important first step. But I also think that there are some things that are about the field experience that are difficult to put into words. For example, I knew I was going to do okay at sea because I was the kind of kid that loved summer camp. I loved being in an isolated environment with the same group of people with a very rigid schedule. Now, if you don't like being in an isolated environment with a whole group of people that never changes and a very rigid schedule, you probably won't like going to sea because everything happens according to what watch you're on and meals are at a special time and you can't get around that. So, you know, how much we could actually change the field experience so that people who are claustrophobic or like more serendipity in their day, I'm not sure that's even possible. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
We have one more question. I'm going to say a quick comment to that too, which I think it was one of my sort of backup comments for the panel in case the conversation flagged, which it didn't, which was great. But it was about the limits. It was about, you know, are there field situations where we just really can't do a lot about the realities of what it is? And I think that that's something that we have to have a serious conversation about and have tiered opportunities for people where they know in advance that they can participate in some, but maybe not necessarily all of the activities. And again, kind of coming back to that point about setting expectations, I think if you are buying into an experience where you expect that to be the case, it's far more digestible than having it sprung on you when you know you're expecting something quite different.
Yeah, very good point. I agree entirely. And that's why I sort of like this idea of when students are younger, being able to, evaluate, you know, what's actually working in this field like on the ground if I decide to pursue it, and is it something that's right for me?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, Erin, you had another question from the chat, from the webinar.
Actually, I just have a question.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do. Because I think Dr. McNutt, you said something very poignant when you made the point that the way things operate, especially with underrepresented or underserved students, we're sort of isolating the toughest rather than necessarily those who have the most to give scientifically. And I've seen that in my experience with other people that I work with and trying to support other scientists of color. And I just wanted to hear more of your thoughts on that, because I think not only is it that we're not getting a lot of people, but also the people we do get, even though they might be the toughest, are they giving 100% to their science when 50% has to go to their survival in the field that they're in? Because there's sort of this thought that, like, we get you to the next step and you're out of the woods now, but you're not. You're still on your own when you get to the faculty level and you're the 1%, or you make it to the graduate program and you're the 1%.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, because let me tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up in a family of all girls. Even the dog was a girl. My dad was the only guy, and he was mostly working. I went to an all-girls school from 2nd grade to 12th grade. My view of the male gender, all the way up through high school, was that boys were wheels in a wallet. I didn't really even think of them as real people. And it wasn't until I got to college and was a co-ed environment that I realized, wow, guys actually have feelings. You can hurt their feelings, and they're just like people everywhere else. But fortunately, by the time I got there, I had been raised in this female environment in which anyone who was doing anything in my world was a woman. So when I first encountered these things like, oh, you must have said something silly on your college application about wanting to major in physics. Girls have come and gone in this department, but there's never yet been one to graduate. Instead of feeling like I had to put a lot of effort into fighting against that, my only reaction was, oh my God, what is wrong with you? And so I think I sort of entered it from this opinion that women do everything and that they did everything. And anyone who didn't think that way was obviously misled and naive. So I don't actually remember putting a lot of extra effort into fighting against these things. I just dismissed them. But I'm sure there are a lot of other women who really had to put a lot of effort into dealing with these negative viewpoints of underrepresented groups in science.
I think that speaks really strongly to the importance of representation and just having role models where the role model you have isn't a role model because they are the exception, but because they are actually quite normal in your world.
And let me tell you this quick story. Years ago, back in the 1990s, NSF had a program called, well, I forget what it was called, but basically it would pay for your sabbatical if you were a woman, only if you went to an institution that had no women in the department. So I was up for a sabbatical from MIT. So I went to Lamont Doherty Research Laboratory, part of Columbia University, where there were no women on the faculty. And after my year experience there, NSF got all the women together who had had their sabbaticals in departments without women, got them all together, sat them down in one room and wanted to talk about their experiences. As people started talking about their experiences, I noticed a theme. And so I asked the group that was assembled, how many of you went to either an all-girls school through high school or an all-girls college? 3/4 of the hands went up in that room. And then I said, how many of these institutions are still all female? Most of the hands went down. But I think that just shows that this first cohort of women that succeeded in science, they had come from female environments that had been encouraging and taught them that they could succeed and that they belonged.
Thank you very much. We have about 3 minutes left on the schedule, but we have until 5 o'clock where I was supposed to say some stuff, and I've said plenty of words. So if you have other things, while we have the rare opportunity to ask Dr. McNutt, let's take that opportunity right now for the next 10 minutes. Great. Here's a question right up at the front. Do you want to just come up and ask it? It might be more expedient.
First off, thank you so much for a great talk. At the end of our panel, we ended on this sort of sad comment of you can't change hearts and minds, which unfortunately I tend to agree with, even though it's sort of a sad realization. But I'm wondering if you, in your experiences, and as someone with, incredible privilege and power and experience, whether sort of at an institutional level, you felt that you have been able to change hearts and minds through institutional policy changes and what that's looked like.
Yeah. So I think the difficulty of changing hearts and minds is one of the reasons why the committee that wrote the report on sexual harassment of women said all you can really punish is actions, what people say, how they behave, what they do. It's really hard to police someone's mind, their values, their thoughts, whatever. But I do think there are opportunities for things to change. One is by simply demonstrating to people how much more effective they are when they include everyone. And I think that's the best way to do it. I have seen so many people turn around 180 degrees once presented with the actual facts of how much having a diverse team improves their science. I'll tell you, I was, just as a quick story, I was over in China this must have been in the early 2010s. And the scientists in China, I went around to a bunch of major labs, and they said, there is such discrimination in publishing. You know, as Chinese scientists, it's so rare that we get our papers in top journals like PNAS or Science or Nature. And this has got to be discrimination. Well, I showed them the data of how many of the papers in these top journals were authored by very international groups of scientists, that they had Europeans, Americans, people from Africa, people from South America, people from Asia on them. And I said, it is by pulling together the best minds in the world that these papers make it into the top journals. So then about 4 years later, I went back to China and visited many of these same institutions. And what I found were truly international groups of scientists, where one Chinese lab would have people from North Korea and from South Korea in the same lab, people from India, people from Japan, all working together in the same laboratory. That year, Chinese research labs had 3 covers on Science magazine, not just papers, 3 covers. So I think, instructing people on the benefits of having diverse groups of researchers is one of the best ways to change hearts and minds.
This is a great point too, because everybody here is a scientist and, is familiar with that desire or need maybe to have evidence before us when we make decisions about something. And one of the things that I was hoping that kind of doing a little more consortium-like activities like this that are cross-disciplinary could accomplish is a resource library and a data library, you know, that brings together information about, first of all, this kind of scope of the problem, the scale of the problem, the diversity of the problem, and then kind of has justification for the proposed solutions that are data-driven. Because I think that we can kind of be upset or frustrated and talk a lot, but until we actually have data, we're going to struggle to make the points and the changes that we would hope to see. So that's one of the things I'm hoping we can have an outcome tomorrow with is brainstorming things we can collect data around and put that all together in one spot.
Good.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more or two more questions or comments. If anybody wants to jump in, are we all feeling energetic at this point in the day?
Maybe worn out.
Well, I know I am. So let me just say thank you again so much for agreeing to do this. We've really benefited a lot from all the different perspectives, and the piece that you've added has just been wonderful. So I really appreciate that on behalf of
Well, thank you
everybody.
all very much. It's been really fun to listen in today to the discussion. And thank you very much for taking up this topic. It's incredibly important, and good luck with all the discussions tomorrow as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.